A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Lena, from Lena's Romance Library. Chapter 1. The Bitter Taste of Betrayal. The champagne tasted wrong. Evelyn Blackwood set down her crystal flute with trembling fingers, the bitter aftertaste coating her tongue like ash. Around her, the grand ballroom of the Blackwood estate sparkled with golden light from 3 massive chandeliers. But the opulence felt suffocating now. Her 25th birthday celebration, the night she was supposed to officially inherit the family fortune, had turned into something sinister. "Happy birthday, sister dear." Celeste's voice dripped honey over venom as she glided across the marble floor in her scarlet gown. Her emerald eyes, so like their father's, gleamed with satisfaction. "You look a bit pale. Perhaps you should sit down." Evelyn's vision blurred at the edges. The faces of the guests, business associates, family friends, distant relatives, became distorted masks of concern and curiosity. Her legs felt like lead, her heart hammering against her ribs in an erratic rhythm that made her chest ache. "What did you do?" Evelyn whispered, gripping the edge of the mahogany table where the birthday cake sat untouched. The white roses decorating it seemed to wilt before her eyes. Celeste's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that would have been beautiful if not for the cruelty behind it. "Nothing that wasn't necessary. Father always said the strong should inherit the earth, not the weak." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only Evelyn could hear. "The digitalis in your champagne will make it look like a heart condition. So tragic, really. Poor Evelyn, dying on her birthday. But don't worry, I'll take excellent care of our family's legacy." The world tilted sideways. Digitalis. Foxglove poison. Evelyn had read enough mystery novels to know what that meant. A plant-based toxin that would mimic heart failure, leaving little trace for investigators to find. How long did she have? Minutes? An hour? "Ladies and gentlemen," Celeste announced, her voice ringing across the ballroom as Evelyn's knees buckled. "I'm afraid my dear sister isn't feeling well. Perhaps we should call this evening short." Murmurs of concern rippled through the crowd, but they sounded distant, like voices heard underwater. Evelyn's vision darkened around the edges as she collapsed, her emerald gown pooling around her on the cold marble floor. The last thing she saw was Celeste's triumphant smile before everything went black. But death, it seemed, had other plans. Evelyn woke to the sound of wind howling through pine trees and the sensation of being carried. Strong arms held her against a broad chest that rumbled with each breath. The sense surrounding her was utterly foreign, yet somehow comforting. Wild and earthy, like rain on forest soil mixed with something uniquely masculine. "She's coming around," a deep voice said above her head. The sound resonated through his chest, sending vibrations through her body that made her feel oddly safe, despite her disorientation. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open to find herself staring up at the most striking face she'd ever seen. Sharp cheekbones cast shadows in the moonlight, and eyes the color of liquid silver gazed down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His dark hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running, and there was something wild about him that set every nerve in her body on edge. "Who?" she began, but her voice came out as barely a croak. "Don't try to speak yet," he said, his voice commanding yet gentle. "The poison is still working through your system." Poison. The memory crashed back. Celeste, the champagne, the digitalis. Evelyn tried to sit up, panic flooding her system, but the stranger's arms tightened around her. "Easy," he murmured. "You're safe now. My name is Kieran Blackthorne. I'm taking you somewhere you can recover." Why did you save me?" The words tumbled out between gasps for air. His silver eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, and for a moment, she could have sworn she saw something inhuman flicker across his features. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in keeping you alive, Evelyn Blackwood," The way he said her name sent shivers down her spine. Not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Even poisoned and weak, she felt drawn to this mysterious stranger who had somehow pulled her from the jaws of death. They moved through the forest with impossible speed, his feet barely making a sound on the pine needle-covered ground. Evelyn should have been terrified. She was alone in the wilderness with a man she didn't know, far from help or civilization. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months, perhaps years. The Blackwood family had always been surrounded by enemies disguised as friends, people who smiled while plotting their downfall. She should have seen Celeste's betrayal coming, should have noticed the signs of her sister's growing resentment over the inheritance laws that favored the firstborn. But she'd been naive enough to believe that blood meant something, that family bonds could overcome greed. "Where are you taking me?" she asked as they crested a hill and she caught sight of a log cabin nestled in a clearing below. Smoke rose from its chimney and warm light spilled from the windows, creating a beacon of safety in the dark forest. "Somewhere your sister can't find you," Kieran replied, and there was something in his tone that made her look up at his face. His jaw was clenched tight, and she could see the muscle ticking there as if he was holding back some powerful emotion. As they approached the cabin, Evelyn noticed details that should have been impossible to see in the darkness. The intricate carvings on the door that looked like wolves running through a forest, the way the windows seemed to be positioned to provide perfect sightlines of the surrounding woods, the subtle defensive measures built into what appeared to be a simple mountain retreat. "You're not just a good Samaritan who happened to find me, are you?" she asked as he carried her up the wooden steps to the front porch. Kieran paused with his hand on the door handle, his silver eyes meeting hers. "No, Evelyn, I'm not." Before she could ask what he meant, the door swung open to reveal a woman with steel gray hair and knowing eyes. She took one look at Evelyn in Kieran's arms and stepped aside without a word. "Bring her to the back room, Alpha," the woman said. "I've already prepared the antidote." "Alpha?" Evelyn's mind reeled. What kind of people called someone Alpha? And how had they known she was poisoned before Kieran even arrived? As Kieran carried her through the cozy interior of the cabin, all stone fireplaces and hand-hewn beams, Evelyn caught glimpses of things that made no sense. Books written in languages she didn't recognize, maps marked with strange symbols, and artwork depicting wolves in human clothing. The back room was clearly set up as some kind of medical facility, complete with an examination table and shelves lined with glass bottles containing herbs and tinctures. The older woman was already mixing something in a clay bowl, her movements practiced and efficient. "Martha knows more about plant-based poisons than most doctors," Kieran explained as he gently set Evelyn down on the examination table. "She's been our pack's healer for longer than I've been alive." Pack. The word hit her like a physical blow, and suddenly all the strange details began forming a picture she didn't want to believe. "What are you?" she whispered, her eyes searching Kieran's face for answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. His expression grew guarded, the warmth in his silver eyes flickering like a candle in the wind. "Drink Martha's antidote first. We'll have plenty of time to talk once you're out of danger." The healer, Martha, approached with a steaming mug that smelled like bitter herbs, and something indefinable that made Evelyn's nose wrinkle. "It won't taste pleasant, child, but it will counteract the digitalis and flush the remaining toxins from your system." Evelyn accepted the mug with hands that still trembled slightly. The liquid was dark green and looked thoroughly unappetizing, but she was alive when she should be dead, and that meant trusting these strangers who had saved her life. She drained the mug in 3 quick gulps, grimacing at the bitter taste that seemed to coat her entire mouth. Almost immediately, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest, and her heartbeat began to steady into a more normal rhythm. "Better?" Kieran asked, and she was surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. "Much." She set the empty mug aside and met his gaze directly. "Now tell me what you are, and why you saved me." Kieran exchanged a look with Martha, who nodded almost imperceptibly before bustling out of the room, leaving them alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths and the weight of whatever revelation was coming. Finally, Kieran spoke. "What do you know about werewolves, Evelyn?" The question should have been absurd, should have made her laugh or demand he stop playing games with her. Instead, she found herself thinking about all the strange details she'd noticed. His inhuman speed through the forest, the way his eyes seemed to glow, the references to packs and alphas. "I know they're supposed to be legends," she said carefully. "Most legends have roots in truth." Kieran moved to the window, his back to her as he gazed out into the darkness. "My people have lived in these mountains for generations, hidden from human society, but occasionally intersecting with it when necessary." "Your people," she repeated. "You mean werewolves?" "Shifters," he corrected. "We prefer that term. And yes, I am one. So is Martha, and about 200 others who call these mountains home." Evelyn stared at his broad shoulders, trying to process what he was telling her. Everything in her rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that she was hallucinating from the poison or suffering from some kind of stress-induced breakdown. But deep in her gut, she knew he was telling the truth. "Why did you save me?" she asked again. Kieran turned from the window, his silver eyes intense as they locked onto hers. "Because 3 days ago, our pack's oracle had a vision. She saw a human woman with dark hair and green eyes, dying from poison on her 25th birthday. She also saw that this woman would be instrumental in saving our pack from a threat we don't yet understand." "A threat?" "Your sister's poison was just the beginning, Evelyn. There are forces moving against both our worlds, human and shifter alike. The Oracle believes you're the key to stopping them." He paused, running a hand through his dark hair. She also saw something else in her vision. "What?" Kieran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She saw that you and I are fated mates." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Evelyn felt something deep inside her chest respond to them. A recognition that made no logical sense but felt as fundamental as her own heartbeat. Chapter 2. The Call of Something Wild Fated Mates. The words echoed in Evelyn's mind as she stared at Kieran, searching his face for any sign that he was joking. But his silver eyes held nothing but absolute seriousness. And something else. Something that looked almost like hunger. "That's impossible," she said, even as her body betrayed her words. Her heart had started racing again, but this time it wasn't from poison. It was from the way Kieran was looking at her, as if she were the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. "I thought so too," he admitted, moving closer to the examination table. "I've never believed much in the Oracle's visions, but when I caught your scent in that ballroom tonight, even over the poison and the fear and the crowd of humans, something inside me recognized you instantly." "My scent?" Evelyn's voice came out higher than she intended. Kieran's nostrils flared slightly, and she could have sworn she saw his canine teeth lengthen for just a moment. Every shifter has a unique scent signature. But mates call to each other in ways that go beyond the physical senses. Your scent is like... He paused, seeming to search for words. "Like coming home after being lost in the wilderness for years." Despite everything, the poison, the betrayal, the impossible revelation that werewolves existed, Evelyn found herself leaning toward him. There was something magnetic about Kieran Blackthorne, something that pulled at her on a level she didn't understand. "This is insane," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed, reaching out to brush a strand of dark hair away from her face. His fingers were warm against her skin, and she shivered at the contact. But that doesn't make it any less real. The door creaked open, saving Evelyn from having to respond. Martha peered in, her weathered face creased with concern. "Alpha, we have a problem," she said. "Patrol just reported humans at the boundary. They're asking questions about the Blackwood girl." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "Celeste? Most likely," Kieran said grimly. "She probably discovered you were missing and is trying to track you down before anyone realizes what she did." "But I don't understand. How would she even know to look here? How did you know to find me?" Kieran and Martha exchanged another of those loaded looks. Finally, Martha spoke up. "Child, your family has a longer history with our pack than you know. The Blackwoods have been allies to shifters for over 2 centuries, though most of that knowledge was lost when your grandfather died." "Grandfather knew about werewolves?" Evelyn's head was spinning again, but this time from shock rather than poison. "He did more than know about us," Martha continued. "He was one of our strongest human allies. The Blackwood fortune was built partially on investments made in partnership with shifter-owned businesses. Your family has always been protectors of our secret." "Then why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because your father chose to distance himself from our world after your mother died," Kieran said quietly. "He blamed shifters for not being able to save her from the car accident, even though no amount of supernatural healing could have helped in that situation." Evelyn pressed her hands to her temples, trying to process everything. "So my sister poisoned me to steal an inheritance that was built on werewolf money, and now I'm supposedly the fated mate of their king. Alpha King, technically." Martha corrected with what might have been amusement. "And yes, that about sums it up." A howl echoed through the night outside, long and mournful. Kieran's head snapped toward the window, his entire body going tense. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "That's the warning howl," he said, already moving toward the door. "Your sister brought more than just questions. She brought weapons." The sound of gunshots erupted from somewhere in the forest, followed by more howling, but this time it was filled with pain and rage rather than warning. Evelyn slid off the examination table, her legs still weak but steady enough to support her. "I have to go," Kieran said, his voice taking on a commanding tone she hadn't heard before. "Martha, keep her safe." "Wait," Evelyn called out, surprising herself with the panic in her voice. "Don't leave me here. If Celeste brought hunters or mercenaries, they'll find this place eventually. I won't hide while people get hurt because of me." Kieran turned back to her, his silver eyes beginning to glow with an otherworldly light. "Evelyn, you don't understand. This isn't your fight." "It became my fight the moment my sister tried to kill me," she said firmly. "And if these people, your people, are in danger because they saved my life, then I'm not hiding in a cabin like some helpless damsel." Something shifted in Kieran's expression, a mixture of pride and exasperation. "You can't fight trained mercenaries with your bare hands." "Then give me a weapon." Martha cleared her throat. "Alpha, she has a point. The girl can't access her inheritance if she's presumed dead, which means Celeste needs to find her body to make the death official. They'll keep coming until they find her." More gunshots echoed through the night, closer this time. Kieran cursed under his breath, running both hands through his hair in frustration. "Fine," he said finally, "but you stay close to me, you do exactly what I say, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding with fear and something else, excitement. For the first time in her 25 years, she was about to fight back against the people who wanted to control or destroy her. Martha disappeared into another room and returned with a hunting rifle and a box of ammunition. "Your grandfather's gun," she said, handing it to Evelyn. "He taught me to shoot with this rifle. Figured you might have inherited more than just his money." The weapon felt familiar in Evelyn's hands, and she realized she had inherited her grandfather's skill with firearms along with his fortune. He'd taught her to shoot when she was 12, despite her father's disapproval, saying that a Blackwood should know how to protect what was theirs. "Silver bullets?" Kieran asked Martha. "Of course not," the healer replied sharply. "What do you take me for? Regular ammunition will work just fine on humans." Another howl split the night, this one cut short in a way that made Evelyn's stomach clench with dread. Someone was hurt. Badly. "We're out of time," Kieran said. He looked at Evelyn one more time, his gaze intense and searching. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" "I'm certain." Something wild and fierce flashed in his silver eyes. "Then stay close and try to keep up." He opened the cabin door and stepped out onto the porch, and Evelyn gasped. In the moonlight, she could see figures moving through the trees, at least a dozen armed men in tactical gear, advancing on the cabin with military precision. But she could also see other shapes moving through the shadows, larger and faster than any human should be. The shifters were fighting back, but they were clearly outgunned. "Celeste hired professional killers," Evelyn said, recognizing the tactical formation the mercenaries were using. "Your sister doesn't do anything halfway, does she?" Kieran replied grimly. A shot rang out from the tree line, the bullet splintering the wooden post next to Kieran's head. He snarled, actually snarled, and the sound sent shivers down Evelyn's spine. "Change of plans," he said, his voice deepening into something that was barely human. "Hold on tight." Before Evelyn could ask what he meant, Kieran was pulling her against his chest again, but this time was different. His body temperature was rising, and she could feel tremors running through his muscles as if something inside him was fighting to get out. "Kieran," she whispered. His silver eyes met hers, and in their depths she saw something ancient and predatory and utterly inhuman. "Trust me," he said. And then he began to change. The transformation was nothing like the Hollywood movies had prepared her for. There was no screaming or agony. Instead, Kieran's shift was fluid and powerful, like watching a force of nature unfold. His bones lengthened and reformed, his muscles expanded, and dark fur erupted across his skin. Within moments, where Kieran had stood, there was now a massive black wolf with silver eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. He was easily twice the size of any natural wolf, with powerful shoulders and legs built for both speed and combat. The wolf, Kieran, lowered his head toward her, and Evelyn understood. She grabbed handfuls of his thick fur and pulled herself onto his back, the rifle slung across her shoulder. More shots rang out from the forest, but now they were answered by howls of rage and the sounds of combat. Kieran bounded off the porch and into the trees, moving with impossible speed and grace through terrain that would have been treacherous for a human. From her position on his back, Evelyn could see the battle unfolding around them. The mercenaries had night vision equipment and automatic weapons, but the shifters had advantages the humans couldn't match: enhanced senses, natural camouflage, and a knowledge of these woods that went back generations. Still, it was clear the pack was taking casualties. She could hear whimpers of pain mixing with the growls of combat, and several times she saw massive wolf forms lying still on the forest floor. Kieran carried her to a rocky outcropping that provided a clear view of the valley where most of the fighting was taking place. He shifted back to human form, naked now, but seemingly unconcerned by his nudity, and crouched beside her. "Can you see the group near the big oak tree?" he asked, pointing to a cluster of tactical lights about 300 yards away. Evelyn raised the rifle and peered through the scope. "I see them. 4 men, 1 woman. The woman is..." Her blood ran cold. "That's Celeste." Her sister stood in the middle of the mercenaries, no longer wearing her elegant ball gown. Instead, she was dressed in black tactical gear that matched her hired killers, and she was holding what looked like a military-grade communication device. She's coordinating their movements, Evelyn realized. She's not just paying them, she's commanding them. "Can you make the shot?" Kieran asked. Evelyn's finger hovered over the trigger. She had a clear line of sight, and at this distance, she could easily take down her sister. One shot, and this nightmare would be over. But as she watched through the scope, she saw Celeste raise her hand and point directly at their position. Her sister was smiling, even though she was too far away for Evelyn to see her face clearly. Somehow she knew they were watching. "It's a trap," Evelyn whispered. "She knows we're here." The realization came a split second too late. The rocky outcropping around them exploded in a hail of gunfire as hidden snipers opened fire from positions Celeste had clearly prepared in advance. Kieran threw himself over Evelyn, his body shielding her from the worst of the assault, but she could feel the sting of stone fragments cutting her exposed skin. They were pinned down, outgunned, and her sister was closing in for the kill. But as bullets whined overhead and the howls of battle echoed through the night, Evelyn felt something she'd never experienced before. A fierce, protective rage that had nothing to do with her own survival, and everything to do with the man covering her with his body. The man who claimed to be her fated mate. The man who had risked everything to save a human he barely knew. For the first time in her life, Evelyn Blackwood understood what it meant to have something worth fighting for. Chapter 3. Blood and silver under the moon. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving only the ringing in Evelyn's ears and the sound of Kieran's labored breathing above her. She could feel the warmth of blood seeping through his shirt where shrapnel had found its mark, but his silver eyes remained alert and focused. "Are you hit?" he whispered, his voice tight with pain he was trying to hide. "I'm fine," she replied, though her hands were shaking as she checked herself for wounds. "But you're bleeding." "I'll heal." He shifted his weight, wincing. Shifters recover faster than humans, but we're still trapped here. Below them in the valley, Evelyn could see tactical lights moving in a coordinated pattern. Celeste's mercenaries were regrouping, probably preparing for a final assault on the pack's position. The howls had grown fewer and more desperate, and Evelyn's heart clenched as she realized what that meant. "Your people are losing," she said. Kieran's jaw tightened. "My pack is strong, but they're not soldiers. These mercenaries your sister hired, they're not just killers. They know about shifters. They came prepared with silver ammunition and scent maskers." "Silver bullets actually work?" "Not the way humans think. We don't burst into flames or anything dramatic. But silver interferes with our healing abilities and causes wounds that take much longer to recover from." He paused, listening to something she couldn't hear. "And if we lose too much blood, we die, just like anyone else." A new sound reached them, the mechanical whir of helicopter rotors in the distance. Evelyn's blood ran cold as she realized what it meant. "Celeste brought reinforcements," she said. Kieran closed his eyes, concentrating. 2 helicopters coming from the south, military grade by the sound of them. His eyes snapped open, blazing with silver fire. "She's not just trying to kill you, Evelyn. She's planning to wipe out my entire pack." The implications hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about inheritance money anymore. Her sister was committing genocide to cover up a single murder. The Celeste she'd grown up with, who'd braided her hair and read her bedtime stories, was capable of mass slaughter to get what she wanted. "There has to be something we can do," Evelyn said desperately. "Some way to even the odds." Kieran looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "There is one way, but it's dangerous, and it would change everything for you." "What do you mean?" "The mate bond," he said quietly. "It's not just emotional or spiritual. When two fated mates complete the bonding process, they share strength, speed, healing ability. A human bonded to an alpha gains temporary access to shifter abilities. Evelyn's heart started racing again, but this time it wasn't from fear. How temporary? Usually a few hours, but in your case? He hesitated. The Oracle's vision showed something unusual about you. She believes you carry dormant shifter bloodline, probably from your great-grandmother's side, diluted over generations but still present. Are you saying I could become a werewolf? Not permanently, not without being bitten by an alpha and surviving the change. But the mate bond might awaken whatever shifter heritage you carry. You could gain enhanced senses, strength, speed, maybe even limited shifting ability. The helicopter sounds were getting closer, and below them she could see more tactical lights appearing as the second wave of mercenaries deployed into the forest. They were running out of time. What does the bonding process involve? She asked. Kieran's eyes darkened, and she could see the predator lurking just beneath his human facade. A blood exchange and physical bonding. It's irreversible, Evelyn. Once we're mated, we're connected for life. You'd feel everything I feel, know when I'm in danger, be able to sense my emotions and location across great distances. And you'd feel the same from me. Yes. The intimacy of what he was describing should have terrified her. She'd known this man for less than 4 hours, and he was asking her to bind herself to him in ways that went beyond any human understanding of partnership. But as she looked into his silver eyes, she realized she'd already made her choice. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was some deeper instinct she didn't understand, but every cell in her body was screaming that Kieran Blackthorne was hers to protect, just as she was his. How do we do it? She asked. His pupils dilated, and she caught a glimpse of elongated canines as his lips parted in surprise. Evelyn, you need to understand. I understand that people I care about are dying while we're hiding behind these rocks. She interrupted. I understand that my sister has become a monster who needs to be stopped. And I understand that for the first time in my life, I'm not running away from a fight. She gripped his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. I trust you, Kieran. Do you trust me? Something wild and fierce blazed in his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of an alpha addressing his mate. I trust you with my life. The bonding ritual was simpler and more intense than she'd expected. Kieran used one of his elongated canines to slice a shallow cut across his palm, then did the same to hers. When their bleeding hands clasped together, Evelyn felt a jolt of electricity race up her arm and straight to her heart. Now the physical bond, he said, his voice rough with strain. It doesn't have to be complete. But we need skin contact and shared breath. Evelyn pulled him down to her, their bodies pressed together on the cold stone, and kissed him with all the desperate passion of someone who might not live to see another sunrise. His mouth was warm and demanding against hers, and she could taste something wild and dangerous on his tongue. The change started immediately. Heat raced through her veins, different from the poison antidote, but equally transformative. Her senses exploded outward. Suddenly she could hear heartbeats from hundreds of yards away, could smell the distinct sense of fear and blood and gunpowder carried on the night wind. When they broke apart, Kieran's eyes were wide with amazement. Your eyes, he whispered. They're glowing. Evelyn looked down at her hands and gasped. Her vision was crystal clear in the darkness, and she could see things that should have been invisible. Heat signatures, movement patterns, the faint trails of scent left behind by passing creatures. I can feel them, she said in wonder. Your pack. I can sense where they are, how badly they're hurt. The mate bond is stronger than I expected, Kieran said, helping her to her feet. You're not just accessing my abilities, you're accessing the pack bond itself. You can sense every shifter in these mountains. The helicopters were directly overhead now, searchlights sweeping the forest. But instead of feeling trapped, Evelyn felt powerful for the first time in her life. She could sense the enemy positions with supernatural clarity, could track their movements, and anticipate their strategy. "Martha is trapped in the cabin with 3 wounded shifters," she said, the knowledge flowing into her mind through the pack bond. "There's a group of mercenaries closing in on them from the north. And there's a sniper nest on the ridge to our east," Kieran added, his own enhanced senses feeding him tactical information. "They're planning to use the helicopters to flush us into the open, then pick us off one by one." "Not if we get to them first," Evelyn said, surprised by the predatory satisfaction in her own voice. She could feel the change working through her body, her muscles becoming denser and more responsive, her reflexes sharpening to inhuman levels. When she flexed her fingers, she could see that her nails had become pointed and razor-sharp. Kieran was staring at her with something that looked like awe. "The Oracle was right. You're not just awakening shifter abilities. You're manifesting them at an alpha level." "Is that unusual?" "It's unheard of." He shook his head in amazement. "Evelyn, I think you're not just my fated mate. I think you're destined to be the Pax Luna, the alpha female." Before she could process what that meant, the sound of automatic gunfire erupted from the direction of Martha's cabin. Through the pack bond, she felt the healer's spike of terror and pain. "They found Martha!" Kieran snarled. Evelyn raised her grandfather's rifle, her new abilities allowing her to track targets that would have been impossible shots for a normal human. "Then let's go save her." They moved through the forest like shadows, Kieran in his wolf form, and Evelyn running alongside him with speed that defied human limitations. The mate bond allowed them to communicate without words, coordinating their approach with the seamless precision of predators who'd hunted together for years. The mercenaries never saw them coming. Evelyn's first shot took out a sniper who was drawing a bead on Martha through the cabin window. Her second dropped the communications specialist who was coordinating the helicopter assault. By the time the other mercenaries realized they were under attack, Kieran had shifted back to human form and was among them, moving with lethal efficiency. The fight was brutal and brief. Enhanced by the mate bond and her awakened abilities, Evelyn found herself moving with fluid grace between targets, her grandfather's rifle becoming an extension of her will. She felt no hesitation, no moral qualms about taking lives. These men had come to slaughter innocents, and she would protect her new pack with everything she had. When the last mercenary fell, Kieran appeared at her side, his naked form splattered with blood, and his silver eyes blazing with pride and fierce affection. "The helicopters are pulling back," he said, listening to sounds beyond human hearing. "But this isn't over. Your sister will regroup and try again." "No, she won't," Evelyn said quietly, her enhanced senses tracking a familiar scent through the trees. "Because she's here. I can smell her perfume." Through the pack bond, she could sense other shifters converging on their location, wounded but alive, ready to stand with their alpha against the human threat. But she could also sense something else, something that made her blood run cold. Celeste wasn't alone, and she'd brought something with her that felt wrong in ways Evelyn's human mind couldn't have comprehended, but her awakened shifter instincts recognized immediately. "Kieran," she whispered. "What we're smelling, that's not entirely human, is it?" Kieran's expression darkened, his nostrils flaring as he caught the same scent that had alarmed her. It's not." His voice carried a note of dread she hadn't heard before. "That's rogue shifter. Multiple rogues, actually. Your sister didn't just hire human mercenaries. She made a deal with exiles from other packs." "Is that bad?" "Rogues are shifters who've been banished from their packs for crimes against shifter law. Usually murder, rape, or breaking the secrecy laws that protect our kind. They're unstable, vicious, and they have nothing to lose. Kieran's hands clenched into fists. And they're immune to pack bonds, which means you won't be able to sense them the way you can sense my wolves. The implications sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. Her newfound abilities had given her confidence, but they were useless against enemies she couldn't track or predict. "How many?" she asked. Kieran closed his eyes, concentrating. "At least 6, maybe more." He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with grim determination. "Evelyn, I need you to get Martha and the wounded to the safe house deeper in the mountains. I'll handle the rogues." "Absolutely not." The words came out with such authority that several approaching pack members stopped in their tracks. "We're bonded now, remember? That means we fight together." "You've had these abilities for 20 minutes, Kieran protested. "Rogues have decades of combat experience." "And I have something they don't," Evelyn replied, surprised by her own certainty. "I have everything to lose, which means I'll fight harder than someone with nothing left." Before Kieran could argue further, the tree line exploded with movement. The rogues didn't announce themselves with howls or posturing. They simply attacked with the silent efficiency of killers who'd perfected their craft over years of survival. The first rogue came at Evelyn in human form, but there was nothing human about the way he moved. His eyes were wild yellow, his fingernails had elongated into claws, and his teeth were fully shifted, even though the rest of his body remained bipedal. She barely had time to raise her rifle before he was on her, moving faster than her enhanced reflexes could track. His claws raked across her shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh with ease, and she cried out as silver fire raced through the wounds. "Silver claws!" Kieran snarled, grabbing the rogue and hurling him 20 feet into a pine tree. "They've weaponized themselves." The rogue hit the tree with enough force to splinter the trunk, but he rolled to his feet immediately, seemingly uninjured. Worse, Evelyn could see that her own wounds weren't healing the way they should have been. The silver was interfering with her shifter abilities just as it did with full-blooded werewolves. "Evelyn, behind you!" Martha's voice rang out from the cabin porch. Evelyn spun to see another rogue approaching. This one fully shifted into a massive gray wolf with scars covering his muzzle and neck. But what made her blood freeze wasn't his size, or his obvious battle experience. It was the collar around his neck, studded with silver spikes, and fitted with what looked like a remote-controlled device. "They're being controlled," she realized. "Someone has remote access to pain compliance collars." The gray wolf lunged at her, but the mate bond allowed her to move in perfect synchronization with Kieran. As she dove left, he came in from the right, his own wolf form intercepting the rogue mid-leap. The two massive predators crashed together in a tangle of fangs and claws, but Kieran was fighting to subdue, while the rogue was fighting to kill. More rogues emerged from the forest. A red-furred female with one missing eye, a black male who looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks, and 2 others who moved with the eerie coordination of a hunting pack. All of them wore the same silver-studded collars. "It's a trap," Evelyn said, understanding flooding through her. "Celeste isn't just using them as weapons, she's controlling them. They can't retreat even if they want to." Through the pack bond, she could feel Kieran's pack members engaging the other rogues, but her own wolves were at a severe disadvantage. They were fighting to protect their territory and their alpha, while the rogues were fighting with the desperate savagery of creatures who knew they were already dead. The red-furred female came at Evelyn next, and this time she was ready. Instead of trying to outfight a creature with superior strength and speed, she used her human intelligence and her grandfather's training. She rolled backward, came up in a shooting position, and put 3 rounds center mass into the approaching rogue. The bullets stopped her charge, but they didn't kill her. Instead, the female snarled and kept coming, blood streaming from her wounds, but her movements barely slowed. The collars. Martha called out, having observed the fight from her position on the porch. Child, you have to destroy the collars. They're pumping the rogues full of stimulants and pain blockers. Evelyn adjusted her aim and put her fourth shot directly into the control device on the red female's collar. The unit sparked and went dead, and immediately the rogue's movements became more natural, more rational. Instead of continuing her suicidal charge, she stopped and looked around as if seeing her surroundings clearly for the first time. The collars are mind control, Evelyn shouted to Kieran, who was still locked in combat with the scarred gray male. If we destroy them, the rogues might stop fighting. But even as she spoke, she could hear her sister's voice carried on the night wind. Celeste was close, and she was giving orders to someone or something that made Evelyn's enhanced hearing pick up sounds that chilled her to the bone. More helicopters coming, Kieran panted, having finally managed to pin the gray rogue long enough to bite through his collar. And something else. Something big. The sound that reached them next wasn't mechanical. It was organic, but unlike any creature Evelyn had ever heard. It was a howl, but deeper and more resonant than any wolf, with harmonics that seemed to vibrate in her bones. "What is that?" she asked. Martha's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. They've been extinct for over a century." "What's been extinct?" "Dire wolves," the healer whispered. "Ancient shifters, the original lycanthropes. They were wiped out during the Shifter Wars because they couldn't control their transformations. They existed in permanent hybrid form, part human intelligence, part wolf instinct, but stable in neither state." The howl came again, closer this time, and Evelyn could see something moving through the trees that was larger than any natural predator. When it stepped into the clearing, she understood why Martha looked so terrified. The dire wolf stood nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, with the basic body plan of a wolf, but the muscular development of something designed for constant combat. Its head was almost human in shape, but elongated into a muzzle filled with fangs that belonged on a saber-toothed tiger. Most disturbing of all, its eyes held unmistakable intelligence. This wasn't a mindless beast, but a thinking predator that had chosen to become a weapon. And around its neck was a collar that looked different from the others, more sophisticated, with multiple control devices and what appeared to be a camera. Celeste is watching through its eyes, Evelyn realized. She's using it as a remote-controlled weapon. The dire wolf's gaze fixed on her with laser focus, and she knew with absolute certainty that her sister had sent this monster specifically to kill her. Not just to complete the inheritance theft, but to eliminate the one person who could testify to what Celeste had done. "Kieran," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the approaching predator. "I need you to trust me one more time." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if I can access pack bonds and shifter abilities through our mate connection, maybe I can access more than just your pack." She could feel the idea forming even as she spoke, driven by instincts she didn't fully understand. That dire wolf isn't completely lost. There's still a shifter consciousness trapped inside all that conditioning and control. If I can reach it... "Evelyn, no. The risk is worth it if it saves your pack." Before Kieran could stop her, Evelyn was walking toward the dire wolf, her rifle lowered but not discarded. She could feel the mate bond thrumming between them, but she was reaching beyond it now, trying to touch something deeper. The fundamental connection that existed between all shifters, the ancient recognition of shared blood and shared struggle. The dire wolf snarled as she approached, its muscles bunching for a killing leap. But Evelyn kept walking, her enhanced senses reading the creature's body language and emotional state with newfound clarity. "I know you can hear me," she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority she was still learning to wield. I know you remember what it was like before the collar, before the drugs, before they turned you into a weapon." The dire wolf's snarl faltered slightly, and Evelyn saw something flicker in its eyes. Confusion, perhaps even recognition. "My name is Evelyn Blackwood," she continued, still approaching despite every survival instinct screaming at her to run. "I'm the new Luna of the Blackthorn Pack, and I'm offering you sanctuary. Not as a weapon, not as a slave, but as a free shifter, with the right to choose your own path." For a moment, the clearing was absolutely silent. Even the ongoing battles between the other rogues and pack members seemed to pause as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Then the dire wolf spoke. Its voice was distorted by its hybrid anatomy, part human speech and part growl. But the words were unmistakably clear. "Luna, help me." Chapter 4. The Ancient Bond. The dire wolf's plea hit Evelyn like a physical blow, the pain and desperation in those distorted words awakening something primal in her newly enhanced consciousness. Through the mate bond, she could feel Kieran's shock and fear, but also his trust in her judgment. "I'm going to help you," she said, taking another step closer to the massive predator. "But I need you to fight the collar's control. Can you do that?" The dire wolf's eyes flickered between the wild yellow of artificial stimulation and something more natural, a deep amber that held ancient wisdom. "Trying," it managed to growl. "Collar, burns, forces, obedience." Evelyn could see the silver spikes embedded in the control device, designed to inject pain directly into the creature's nervous system whenever it showed signs of independent thought. The technology was more sophisticated than the simple compliance collars worn by the other rogues. This was advanced behavioral modification equipment that had probably cost more than most people made in a year. Her sister hadn't just hired mercenaries and rogues. She'd invested in cutting-edge shifter control technology, which meant this wasn't a hastily planned revenge killing. Celeste had been preparing for this night for months, maybe years. "What's your name?" Evelyn asked, now close enough to see the scars covering the dire wolf's massive frame. "Was Marcus," the creature replied, its voice becoming slightly more human as it fought against the collar's influence. "Marcus Greystone, last of the ancients." The name sent a ripple of recognition through the watching pack members. Even in her newly awakened state, Evelyn could sense their awe and terror. Marcus Greystone was a legend. A dire wolf who had supposedly died in the Shifter Wars over a century ago. "The wars ended in 1923, Martha called out from the porch, her voice tight with disbelief. "Marcus, if it's really you, you've been missing for over 100 years. The dire wolf's gaze shifted to the healer, and something like relief flickered in his amber eyes. "Martha, little Martha, who stitched my wounds after the Battle of Silver Creek." "I'm not so little anymore," Martha replied, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "We thought you were dead. The whole pack mourned you." "Was captured," Marcus growled, his voice gaining strength as more of his consciousness broke free from the collar's control. "Experimented on, tortured, made into weapon for humans who hunt our kind." The implications were staggering. If Marcus was telling the truth, then there were people who had been capturing and enslaving shifters for over a century, using them as weapons against their own kind. Celeste had somehow gained access to that network. "The collar," Evelyn said urgently, sensing that the control device was beginning to reassert its influence. Marcus's eyes were flickering back toward wild yellow, and his muscles were tensing for attack. "How do I destroy it without killing you?" "Can't destroy," Marcus managed to say through gritted fangs. "Booby-trapped. Explosion will kill me and everyone within 50 feet. Through the pack bond, Evelyn felt Kieran's surge of protective fear. He was moving toward her, ready to shift and throw himself between her and the dire wolf when the collar's control reasserted itself. But Evelyn had another idea, born from her strange new connection to the fundamental forces that bound all shifters together. If she could reach Marcus's consciousness once, maybe she could do more than just communicate with it. Maybe she could help him fight back from the inside. "Marcus, I need you to let me into your mind," she said, extending her hand toward his massive head. "I'm going to try to share my connection to the pack bond with you. If it works, you might be able to override the collar's commands." "Dangerous," Marcus warned, but he was already lowering his head toward her outstretched hand. "My mind, damaged, might hurt you. I'm willing to take that risk." The moment her palm touched the coarse fur between Marcus's eyes, Evelyn's consciousness exploded outward. Instead of the controlled awareness she'd experienced through the mate bond, this was chaotic and overwhelming. A century of pain, rage, and forced servitude crashed through her mind like a tsunami. She saw flashes of Marcus's captivity. Sterile laboratories where humans in white coats performed experiments on shifters, conditioning facilities where cubs were trained to kill their own kind, auction houses where enslaved shifters were sold to the highest bidder. The scope of it was horrifying. There was an entire shadow industry built on shifter suffering, and it had been operating in secret for generations. But beneath all the trauma and conditioning, she could sense Marcus's true self, the alpha he'd been before his capture. The leader who'd fought to protect shifter communities during the wars. The ancient being who carried the genetic memory of the very first lycanthropes. "I see you," she whispered, both aloud and directly into his consciousness. "I see who you really are, Marcus Greystone. You are not a weapon. You are not a slave. You are the heir to an ancient lineage, and you have the right to be free." Through their connection, she began to share her own experience of the pack bond, the sense of belonging, the protective instincts, the joy of being part of something larger than herself. She showed him Kieran's pack, wounded but unbroken, fighting to protect their territory and their way of life. Marcus's consciousness seized on the connection like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. She felt his own mental defenses, dormant for so long, beginning to strengthen and reassert themselves. The collar's artificial commands started to weaken as his natural shifter instincts remembered what it felt like to choose his own actions. But the technology fought back. The silver spikes in the collar began to glow red-hot, injecting increased levels of pain and chemical control agents directly into Marcus's bloodstream. His massive body convulsed, and Evelyn felt his agony through their mental link. "Can't... Hold on!" he gasped, his consciousness beginning to fracture under the assault. That was when Evelyn made a decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to help Marcus fight the collar's control, she reached out through the pack bond to every shifter in the area. Kieran's wolves, the freed rogues, even the wounded fighters hiding in the forest, and invited them all into the mental link she'd established with the dire wolf. The result was unprecedented. For the first time in shifter history, multiple packs were connected through a single bonding consciousness. The combined mental strength of dozens of shifters flowed through Evelyn and into Marcus, giving him the power he needed to break free from a century of conditioning. The collar around his neck began to spark and smoke as his reclaimed consciousness overloaded its control circuits. But instead of exploding, the device simply went dead, its lights fading as Marcus's natural mental defenses rejected its influence completely. When the connection faded, Evelyn found herself on her knees in the pine needles, her mind reeling from the psychic backlash of what she'd just accomplished. But Marcus was free, truly free, for the first time in over 100 years. The dire wolf looked down at her with clear amber eyes, his voice now fully his own. "Thank you, Luna. You have given me back my soul." Through the pack bond, she could feel the amazement and reverence radiating from every shifter who had witnessed what just happened. She'd done something that the oldest among them had never seen before. She'd created a temporary super pack that transcended traditional boundaries and hierarchies. "Kieran," she said weakly, reaching for her mate as the strain of the psychic link left her dizzy and disoriented. He was beside her instantly, pulling her into his arms and checking her for injuries. "That was incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe and worry. "But it could have killed you. The amount of psychic energy you just channeled was necessary," she finished. "Kieran, what I saw in Marcus's memories. This is bigger than just Celeste trying to steal my inheritance. There's an entire network of people who capture and enslave shifters. They've been operating for over a century, and they're planning something big." "What kind of something big?" Before she could answer, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air again. But this time there were more of them, and they were coming from multiple directions. Through her enhanced hearing, Evelyn could detect at least 4 aircraft converging on their position. "They're surrounding us," Marcus said grimly, his massive head turning to track the incoming threats. "The humans who controlled me won't let me go easily. I know too much about their operations." "Then we don't let them take you back," Kieran said firmly. "You're under the protection of the Blackthorn Pack now." "And the temporary super pack I just created," Evelyn added, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. "Every shifter who felt that connection owes Marcus their aid. We're not just fighting for our territory anymore. We're fighting for the freedom of all shifters." Through the pack bond, she could sense the other wolves responding to her declaration. The rogues who'd been freed from their own collars were moving to join the defense, their gratitude toward their liberator overriding their exile status. Even shifters from neighboring territories were heading toward the Blackthorn lands, drawn by the unprecedented call for unity she'd broadcast through the psychic link. "Evelyn," Martha called from the cabin porch. "You need to see this." The healer was pointing toward the main access road, where a convoy of black vehicles was approaching with military precision. But these weren't more mercenaries. The cars were too expensive, too official-looking. "Government," Marcus said, his voice filled with old hatred. "The shadow agency that's been hunting our kind for generations. They must have been monitoring my collar's signal." "How many people know about shifters?" Evelyn asked, her mind reeling from yet another revelation. "More than you'd think, fewer than we fear," Kieran replied grimly. "There are elements within various governments that have always known about us. Most choose to maintain the secret because it serves their purposes. But some," he gestured toward the approaching convoy, "some see us as threats to be eliminated or resources to be exploited." The helicopters were directly overhead now, their searchlights turning the forest clearing into a temporary daylight. But instead of landing or deploying troops, they seemed to be waiting for something. That something became clear when Celeste's voice echoed through a loudspeaker mounted on the lead vehicle. "Evelyn, darling sister, I know you can hear me," Celeste said, her tone sickeningly sweet. "I'm impressed, truly. When I hired those mercenaries to clean up my little inheritance problem, I never expected you to survive, let alone transform yourself into whatever you've become." The convoy had stopped just outside the tree line, close enough for normal conversation but far enough away to avoid any surprise attacks. Evelyn could see her sister standing in the open sunroof of the lead vehicle, dressed in tactical gear but speaking with the casual confidence of someone who held all the cards. "You've caused quite a stir in certain circles," Celeste continued, "creating psychic links between different shifter packs, awakening dormant genetic traits, freeing century-old captives. The researchers are absolutely fascinated by you." "Researchers?" Evelyn called back, her voice carrying clearly across the distance thanks to her enhanced vocal cords. "Oh yes, dear sister. Did you think I was working alone? The Blackwood fortune may be substantial, but this operation required resources far beyond what I could access independently. Celeste's smile was visible even from a distance. It turns out there are people very interested in studying exceptional specimens like yourself. People who are willing to pay handsomely for the opportunity. The implications hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Celeste hadn't just tried to kill her for money. She'd planned to sell her to the same people who had enslaved Marcus and countless other shifters. She's been working with them all along, Marcus growled, his massive frame trembling with barely contained rage. The collar I wore, the experiments, the conditioning. Your sister helped design some of it. You're lying, Evelyn said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. The enhanced senses that came with her awakened abilities could detect deception, and Marcus was telling the truth. I'm afraid he's not, Celeste replied cheerfully. I've been collaborating with the Shifter Research Division for almost 3 years now. They needed inside information about shifter communities, and I needed funding for my little succession plan. It was a perfect partnership. Until I turned out to be more than just a human obstacle to your inheritance, Evelyn said, understanding flooding through her. Exactly. When their monitoring equipment detected the psychic event you created tonight, they realized you weren't just some random human who'd been bitten by a werewolf. You're something new, something unprecedented. Celeste's voice took on an acquisitive tone that Evelyn remembered from their childhood. It was the same way she'd sounded when coveting a particularly expensive toy. They're offering me 10 times the Blackwood fortune for exclusive access to you. And if I refuse to come quietly, then we kill everyone here except you and take you anyway, Celeste said matter-of-factly. The helicopters above us are equipped with military-grade weaponry, and the vehicles behind me contain enough firepower to level this entire forest. You can surrender peacefully, or you can watch your new friends die because of your stubbornness. Through the pack bond, Evelyn could feel the resolve of every shifter in the area. None of them were willing to surrender her to save themselves, but she also knew that Celeste wasn't bluffing about the military hardware. The shadowy government agency her sister was working with clearly had access to resources that made hired mercenaries look like mall security. But they had underestimated one crucial factor. They thought they were dealing with a newly awakened shifter who didn't understand her own abilities. They had no idea that Evelyn Blackwood had spent 25 years learning to fight battles on multiple fronts, using weapons they would never see coming. I have a counterproposal, Evelyn called out, her voice carrying new authority that made even the helicopter pilots pause in their circling patterns. I'm listening, Celeste replied, though her tone suggested she was simply humoring her sister. You leave now, take your government friends with you, and never come near shifter territory again. In exchange, I won't release everything I learned from Marcus's memories to every major news network in the country. The silence that followed was telling. Celeste was no longer smiling. You're bluffing, she said finally. Am I? Evelyn reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her smartphone, a device she'd managed to keep with her through everything that had happened tonight. I've been recording this entire conversation, sister dear, including your confession about working with illegal government research programs and your admission to attempting murder via poison. Even if you release that recording, no one will believe it. Maybe not. But they'll believe the video I'm about to broadcast live to my 50,000 social media followers. Evelyn held up the phone, its camera lens pointed directly at the government convoy. Everyone say hello to the shadow agency that's been kidnapping and experimenting on American citizens for over a century. The reaction was immediate and violent. The lead helicopter opened fire, not at the shifters, but at Evelyn's phone, trying to destroy the device before she could complete the broadcast. But they were too late. The moment Celeste had started talking, Evelyn had been streaming everything live to multiple platforms simultaneously. The confession, the threats, the government vehicles, the military hardware, all of it was now preserved in the digital cloud, beyond anyone's ability to suppress or deny. "You always were too clever for your own good," Celeste snarled, her composure finally cracking. "And you always underestimated me," Evelyn replied. "But that ends tonight." What happened next would later be called the Blackthorn Revelation, the moment when the existence of shifters was revealed to the human world, not through government disclosure or gradual revelation, but through a live-streamed confrontation that was viewed by millions of people in real time. Because as the government forces opened fire and the shifters prepared to make their final stand, Evelyn did something that changed the world forever. She howled. Not a human scream, not a cry for help, but the ancient call of a Luna rallying her pack to battle. The sound carried through the night air and through the psychic bonds she'd forged, reaching every shifter within 100 miles and calling them to war. And they answered. Chapter 5. The Luna's Call. The howl that erupted from Evelyn's throat was unlike anything the human world had ever heard. It started as a sound but became something more. A psychic beacon that resonated through the shifter collective consciousness like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples of awakening across the entire continent. Through her live stream, millions of viewers watched in stunned silence as wolves began emerging from the forest around the government convoy. Not just a few, not just Kieran's pack, but hundreds of them, shifters from dozens of different territories who had felt the Luna's call and abandoned everything to answer it. "This is impossible," one of the government agents was saying into his radio, his voice picked up by Evelyn's phone microphone. "We're showing shifter signatures approaching from every direction. At least 300 individuals, maybe more." Celeste was no longer standing confidently in her vehicle's sunroof. She'd dropped down into the armored interior, her face pale with the realization that her carefully orchestrated plan was collapsing into chaos. "Evelyn, stop this!" she called out, her voice tight with panic. "You don't understand what you're doing. If you expose our world, it will mean war between humans and shifters." "No," Evelyn replied, her voice carrying with supernatural clarity to every person and shifter in the area. "It will mean the end of the shadow war that's been going on for a century. No more secret experiments, no more disappeared shifters, no more collars and control devices. The truth is out there now, and it can't be taken back." Through the pack bonds, she could feel the approaching shifters, not just wolves, but bears, big cats, ravens, and species she didn't even recognize. The Luna's call had awakened something primal in all of them, a recognition that this moment would define the future of their kind. Marcus stood beside her, his massive dire wolf form serving as a living symbol of what the shadow government had done to their people. His presence in the live stream was causing particular excitement among the viewers. Comment streams were exploding with speculation about real werewolves and government conspiracies. "The humans are going to panic," Kieran said through the mate bond, his thoughts colored with concern for what they'd just unleashed. "Some will," Evelyn agreed. "But others will remember that we've been living alongside them in secret for centuries without causing harm. Fear is powerful, but so is truth." The first of the responding shifters reached the clearing. A pack of mountain lions led by a massive golden female who moved with the fluid grace of an apex predator. Behind them came bears, their bulk making the ground tremble as they positioned themselves around the government vehicles. "Sir, we need to evacuate now," one of the agents was saying to his commander. "We don't have enough firepower to handle this many targets." But the commander, a grizzled man in his 50s who carried himself with military bearing, stepped out of his vehicle instead of retreating into it. He raised his hands in a gesture of non-aggression and walked toward the line of shifters. "I'm Colonel James Harrison, U.S. Special Operations, he called out. I'm requesting a ceasefire so we can negotiate. The massive golden mountain lion shifted into human form, a Native American woman in her 40s with braided hair and traditional tattoos covering her arms. I am Elena Moonclaw, Alpha of the Rocky Mountain Coalition, she replied. You are trespassing on sovereign shifter territory and threatening our newly recognized Luna. State your intentions. Colonel Harrison's eyes widened slightly at the word sovereign, and Evelyn realized that the political implications of what was happening were even more complex than she'd imagined. If shifters were claiming territorial sovereignty, it meant they were essentially declaring themselves a separate nation with the right to self-governance. We're here, on the authority of classified federal directives, Harrison replied carefully. But given the changed circumstances, I think we need to involve people with more political authority than I possess. The circumstances changed the moment you started experimenting on our people. Marcus growled, his voice carrying the authority of his ancient lineage. The moment you turned us into weapons against our own kind. Harrison's gaze shifted to the dire wolf, and Evelyn saw recognition flicker in his eyes. You're supposed to be dead. The files say Marcus Greystone died in 1923. The files lie, Marcus replied, as they have lied about everything your agency has done for the past century. Through her enhanced hearing, Evelyn could detect radio chatter from the helicopters overhead. The pilots were receiving orders to withdraw, and she realized that someone in the chain of command had recognized what she'd suspected. This situation had escalated far beyond a simple cleanup operation. Colonel, she called out, her voice carrying the authority of her Luna status. You have two choices. You can continue to treat this as a military situation and face the consequences of attacking American citizens on live television. Or you can acknowledge that your agency's illegal operations have been exposed and begin negotiations for a peaceful resolution. What kind of negotiations? Harrison asked. The kind where shifters are recognized as a legitimate minority group with the same rights as any other American citizens, Elena Moonclaw interjected. The kind where the shadow programs are shut down permanently and reparations are made to the families of those who were taken. And the kind where people like my sister face justice for their crimes, Evelyn added, her gaze fixed on Celeste's hiding place inside the armored vehicle. The livestream viewer count had now reached over 1 million, and the comment sections were moving too fast for human eyes to follow. News organizations were starting to pick up the feed, and Evelyn could see notification alerts popping up on her phone indicating that major networks were requesting permission to rebroadcast her stream. This is bigger than any of us can handle in the field, Colonel Harrison said finally. I need to contact my superiors and get politicians involved. This is going to require congressional hearings, UN oversight, international treaties. Then contact them, Evelyn replied. But while you're making your calls, understand this. The secret is out. Shifters exist, we're American citizens, and we're not going back into hiding. Any attempt to force us back underground will be met with the full resistance of every shifter community in the country. As if to emphasize her point, more shifters continued to arrive. A murder of ravens that filled the sky like a living storm cloud. A pack of wolves from the Northern Territories. Even what looked like a family of bear shifters with cubs clinging to their mothers' backs. How many are there? Harrison asked, his military composure finally showing cracks. In North America? Probably 50,000 individuals across all species, Elena replied. Worldwide? Nobody knows for certain, but estimates range into the millions. The numbers were staggering, and Evelyn could see Harrison doing the math in his head. Even with the full resources of the U.S. military, there was no way to contain or control a population that large, especially when they were distributed across every state and integrated into human society at every level. Ma'am, one of Harrison's subordinates approached him with a satellite phone. Washington wants to speak with you immediately. Harrison took the phone but hesitated before answering it. His gaze swept across the assembled shifters, then focused on Evelyn. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I want you to know that not everyone in the government was aware of the research programs. Most of us believed the official story that the Shifter Research Division was purely theoretical." "I believe you," Evelyn replied, and she meant it. Her enhanced senses could detect the sincerity in his voice. But ignorance doesn't excuse the harm that was done, or the harm that would have continued if Marcus hadn't been freed tonight. Harrison nodded grimly and activated the satellite phone. "This is Colonel Harrison reporting from the Blackthorn incident site," he said. "Sir, we have a situation that requires immediate presidential involvement. The shifter population has been revealed to the public through a live broadcast, and we're currently surrounded by several hundred individuals claiming territorial sovereignty." Evelyn couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could see Harrison's expression growing more tense with each passing moment. Finally, he lowered the phone and looked directly at her. "The president wants to speak with you personally," he said. "You're being invited to Washington for emergency negotiations. And if I refuse, then we're looking at the possibility of a constitutional crisis unlike anything in American history." Harrison's voice was heavy with the weight of what he was saying. "Ma'am, you've essentially just declared independence for an entire population that the federal government didn't officially know existed. This is going to require legal frameworks that don't currently exist." Through the pack bonds, Evelyn could feel the expectation and hope radiating from the assembled shifters. They were looking to her as their Luna, their leader in this unprecedented moment. The responsibility was overwhelming, but it was also energizing in a way she'd never experienced. "I'll go to Washington," she said finally, "but not alone. I want representatives from every major shifter community, full media coverage of all negotiations, and guarantees that no shifter will be detained or harmed while talks are ongoing." "I'll convey your terms," Harrison replied. "And Colonel?" Evelyn's voice carried a note of steel that made several nearby soldiers take a step back. "My sister comes with us. She's going to face charges for attempted murder, conspiracy, and collaboration with illegal human experimentation programs. The age of Celeste Blackwood's impunity ends tonight." The armored vehicle's door finally opened, and Celeste emerged with her hands raised in surrender. But instead of the fear or anger Evelyn expected to see, her sister was smiling. "You always were dramatic, Evelyn," Celeste said as federal agents moved to escort her. "But you have no idea what you've just started. The research programs weren't the real threat to your kind. They were protection against what's coming." "What are you talking about?" "Ask Marcus about the others," Celeste said as the agents led her away. "Ask him about the shifters who chose a different path during the wars. The ones who decided humans weren't worthy of coexistence." Through her connection to the dire wolf, Evelyn felt a chill of recognition and dread. Marcus's memories contained fragments of something darker than government experimentation, references to shifter extremists who had broken away from the peace treaties that ended the shifter wars. Groups that had spent the past century planning their own version of species war. "Marcus?" she said quietly. The ancient shifter's amber eyes were troubled. "Your sister speaks of the Dominion," he said. "Shifters who believe our kind should rule over humanity rather than hide from it. I thought they had been wiped out decades ago." "Apparently not," Elena Moonclaw said grimly. "There have been rumors in the Western Territories about organized attacks on human settlements, made to look like animal attacks or natural disasters." The implications were staggering. Evelyn had just revealed the existence of shifters to the world in the name of peace and coexistence, but if there were extremist factions planning violence against humans, her revelation might have just provided them with the chaos they needed to launch their own agenda. "How long do we have?" she asked Marcus. "Unknown," the dire wolf replied. "But if the Dominion still exists, they will see tonight's events as either an opportunity or a threat to their plans. Either way, they will act quickly. Colonel Harrison had finished his phone conversation and was approaching with what looked like a full military escort. "Ma'am, we have multiple helicopters inbound to transport you and your delegation to Washington. The president has cleared his schedule and is assembling an emergency cabinet meeting." "And what about the shifters who aren't coming to Washington?" Evelyn asked, gesturing toward the hundreds of individuals who had answered her call. "They're not going back into hiding." "Temporary autonomous zones are being established in key shifter territories," Harrison replied. "Federal authorities are pulling back to create buffer zones while negotiations proceed. It's not a permanent solution, but it should prevent immediate conflicts." The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air, not the military gunships from earlier, but larger transport vehicles designed to carry passengers rather than weapons. As they descended into the clearing, Evelyn realized that her life as she'd known it was over. 24 hours ago, she'd been a sheltered heiress whose biggest worry was managing her family's business interests. Now she was the Luna of a supernatural nation that had just declared its existence to the world, facing the responsibility of negotiating the future of human-shifter relations while unknown extremist factions plotted in the shadows. Kieran appeared at her side, having shifted back to human form and somehow acquired clothing from one of the pack members. "Are you ready for this?" he asked through their mate bond. "No," she admitted, "but I don't think anyone could be ready for something like this." "I'll be with you every step of the way," he promised. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." As they boarded the helicopter that would carry them toward their new destiny, Evelyn caught sight of her reflection in the aircraft's window. Her eyes still held the faint glow of her awakened abilities, and she could see the marks of her transformation in the way she carried herself, more confident, more aware, more dangerous than she'd ever been as a purely human woman. The girl who had been poisoned at her birthday party was gone forever. In her place stood Evelyn Blackwood Blackthorne, Luna of the North American Shifter Coalition, and the woman who would either broker peace between two species or watch them tear each other apart. But as the helicopter lifted off and carried her toward Washington, D.C., she felt something she'd never experienced before. Complete certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The mate bond hummed between her and Kieran, strengthened by the trials they'd already faced together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, political negotiations, extremist threats, the complex work of building a new society, they would meet them as partners in every sense of the word. And if the Dominion or any other force thought they could destroy what the shifters had built through centuries of secret survival, they were about to learn just how formidable a Luna could be when she was fighting to protect her pack. Chapter 6. The Halls of Power. The White House Situation Room had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Evelyn sat at the polished mahogany table across from the President of the United States, flanked by Kieran and representatives from shifter communities across North America. The air was thick with tension and the scent of barely controlled supernatural power. President Sarah Chen looked exhausted, which was understandable given that she'd been woken up at 3 a.m. to deal with a constitutional crisis that had no precedent in American history. Her advisors surrounded her, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, the Director of National Intelligence, and several people whose titles Evelyn couldn't identify, but whose nervous energy suggested they dealt with things the public was never supposed to know about. "Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly," President Chen said, her voice carefully controlled. As of 6 hours ago, the American public became aware that an estimated 50,000 citizens possess the ability to transform into various animal forms. These individuals are claiming territorial sovereignty and demanding recognition as a distinct minority group with special protections under federal law. That's an oversimplification, but essentially correct, Elena Moonclaw replied. As the elected representative of the Western Shifter Coalition, she'd taken point on the political negotiations. We're not claiming sovereignty in the sense of seceding from the United States. We're claiming the right to self-governance within our traditional territories, similar to the arrangements made with Native American tribal lands. The Secretary of Defense, a stern-faced man named General Morrison, leaned forward aggressively. With all due respect, Ms. Moonclaw, tribal sovereignty was established through centuries of treaties and legal precedent. You can't simply declare yourselves a sovereign nation overnight. Can't we? Marcus interjected, his human form still imposing despite being dressed in a borrowed suit that barely fit his massive frame. We've been living in these territories for longer than European settlements have existed on this continent. We've maintained our own governments, our own laws, our own social structures. The only thing that's changed is that we're no longer hiding. President Chen held up a hand to forestall General Morrison's reply. Setting aside the legal complexities for a moment, I need to understand the immediate security implications. Ms. Blackwood, or should I say Ms. Blackthorn, your live stream has been viewed over 50 million times since last night. There are protests forming in major cities, and we're receiving reports of violence against anyone suspected of being a werewolf. Evelyn felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders. I understand that the revelation has caused fear and confusion, but the alternative was allowing the shadow programs to continue indefinitely while shifters disappeared into secret facilities. About those shadow programs, the Attorney General interjected, we're going to need full disclosure about the extent of the illegal activities you've uncovered. If federal agents were involved in kidnapping and human experimentation, there will be prosecutions. Gladly, Evelyn replied, but I want immunity guarantees for any shifters who come forward as witnesses, and I want independent oversight of the investigation. The same agencies that allowed these programs to operate for a century can't be trusted to investigate themselves. The Director of National Intelligence, a woman named Catherine Webb, spoke up for the first time. Ms. Blackthorn, there's something you need to understand. The Shifter Research Division wasn't just conducting experiments for scientific curiosity. They were preparing defenses against a very real threat. My sister mentioned something about extremist shifters, Evelyn said carefully. Webb activated a tablet and projected images onto the room's main screen. Satellite photos showed what looked like destroyed towns, but the destruction patterns were unlike anything conventional weapons could produce. These are recent attacks in remote areas of Montana, Idaho, and Alaska, Webb explained. The official reports list them as avalanches, forest fires, and animal attacks. But the evidence suggests coordinated strikes by organized groups of shifters. One image showed claw marks in reinforced concrete that were far too large and too deep to have been made by any natural animal. Another showed a pattern of destruction that suggested creatures capable of moving faster and hitting harder than any normal predator. The Dominion, Marcus said grimly. They're not just planning anymore. They've started their war. How long have you known about this? Kieran demanded, his voice carrying the authority of an alpha confronting a potential threat to his pack. Intelligence agencies have been tracking unusual activity for about 2 years, Webb replied. But we didn't have enough information to understand what we were dealing with until your dire wolf friend here provided context. And instead of reaching out to legitimate shifter communities for help, you decided to continue the illegal experimentation programs, Elena said, her voice cold with contempt. There were elements within the government who believed that approach was justified, President Chen admitted. I want to be clear that I was not aware of the full scope of these programs until tonight. As of now, all covert operations against shifter communities are suspended pending a full review. That's a start, Evelyn said. But suspension isn't enough. These programs need to be shut down permanently, with full accountability for everyone involved. Agreed, the president replied. But in exchange, I need your help dealing with the Dominion threat. If there are extremist shifters planning attacks on human populations, your communities are in the best position to identify and stop them. The request made sense from a tactical standpoint, but Evelyn could feel the resistance from some of the other shifter representatives through her expanded pack bonds. Many of them had spent decades or centuries avoiding any cooperation with human authorities, and the revelation of the shadow programs had only reinforced their distrust. Before we agree to any cooperation, Elena said, we need concrete guarantees about shifter rights and protections. Registration programs, mandatory testing, internment facilities, all of that is off the table permanently. And we need reparations for the families of those who were taken by the research programs, Marcus added, starting with full disclosure about what happened to every shifter who disappeared into your facilities. General Morrison looked like he was about to object, but President Chen silenced him with a glance. I'm prepared to sign executive orders establishing those protections immediately, she said, but I need something from you in return. Information about Dominion capabilities and likely targets. Evelyn closed her eyes and reached out through her pack bonds, feeling for any connections or information that might help. What she found was disturbing. Several of the shifters who had answered her Luna call the previous night carried memories of encounters with Dominion scouts, creatures who had been recruiting for some kind of coordinated action. They're not just planning random attacks, she said, opening her eyes. They're building toward something specific. A coordinated strike designed to provoke maximum fear and retaliation against all shifters. A false flag operation? Webb said grimly. Create enough violence to justify a military response against shifter communities, which would drive more moderate shifters toward extremism. Exactly. And the timing isn't coincidental, Kieran added. They knew about last night's revelation beforehand. They're probably planning to use the chaos and confusion to launch their attacks while government resources are focused on managing the political crisis. The implications were terrifying. If the Dominion succeeded in provoking a war between humans and shifters, it would be a catastrophe for both species. The moderate shifter communities would be caught between human military forces and extremist violence, while human civilians would face attacks from creatures they had no ability to defend against. How much time do we have? President Chen asked. Marcus concentrated, accessing memories that went back over a century. Based on their historical patterns, probably less than a week. The Dominion prefers to strike during periods of maximum confusion, when normal security measures are disrupted. Then we need to move fast, the president said. I'm authorizing the creation of a joint task force, human and shifter personnel working together to identify and neutralize Dominion cells before they can act. And the political situation? Elena asked. The protests, the fear, the demands for registration and containment? I'll be addressing the nation tonight, President Chen replied. Full disclosure about the existence of shifter communities, acknowledgement of past government failures, and a call for unity in the face of the extremist threat. She paused, looking directly at Evelyn. I'd like you to speak as well. As the Luna who revealed our existence to the world, your voice carries weight with both communities. The request was both an honor and a burden. Evelyn had never given a political speech, let alone one that would be watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world. But she could feel the expectation and trust flowing through her pack bonds. Shifters across the continent were looking to her for leadership in this unprecedented moment. I'll do it, she said. But I want to bring Marcus with me. The American people need to see what the shadow programs did to our people, and they need to understand what we're trying to prevent. Agreed, the president said. Director Webb, I want a full briefing on Dominion activities within the hour. General Morrison, coordinate with the shifter representatives on joint task force operations. And get me the Attorney General. We're going to need new laws passed faster than Congress has ever moved before. As the meeting broke up into smaller working groups, Evelyn found herself momentarily alone with Kieran in a corner of the Situation Room. The mate bond thrummed between them, carrying undertones of pride, worry, and fierce protectiveness. "Are you ready to become the public face of our species?" he asked quietly. "No," she admitted, "but I don't think anyone could be. A week ago, I didn't even know shifters existed. Now I'm supposed to represent 50,000 people in front of the entire world." "You're not representing them," Kieran said, taking her hands in his. "You're representing us. All of us together. That's what the Lunabon means. You carry the collective strength and wisdom of every shifter who has accepted you as their leader." She could feel it now, that vast network of connections that had formed when she'd sent out her call the previous night. Thousands of minds touching hers lightly, offering support and guidance and the accumulated knowledge of generations. She wasn't facing this alone. She had the backing of every shifter who believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence. "There's something else," she said, lowering her voice further. "I've been sensing something through the pack bonds. There are more awakened humans out there. People like me who carried dormant shifter genetics but never knew it. Last night's psychic event didn't just call to existing shifters. It awakened potential inhumans who have the bloodline." Kieran's eyes widened. "How many?" "Hundreds, maybe thousands. And they're all confused and scared and don't understand what's happening to them." She paused, feeling the weight of another responsibility settling on her shoulders. "They're going to need guidance, training, protection. The Dominion will try to recruit them, and panicked humans will try to hurt them. We'll figure it out," Kieran promised. "All of it. The Dominion, the politics, the new awakenings. We'll handle each challenge as it comes." Director Webb approached them, with a tablet in her hands. "Ms. Blackthorne, I need you to look at something. We've been monitoring social media and news reports since last night, and there's a pattern emerging that you should be aware of." The tablet showed a map of the United States with dozens of red dots scattered across it. Each of these represents a reported supernatural incident since your broadcast went live. Most of them are probably hoaxes or hysteria, but some of them... She tapped one of the dots, bringing up a news report from a small town in Oregon. This one involves a convenience store robbery where witnesses claim the perpetrator shifted from human to wolf form during the crime. "Dominion?" Evelyn asked. "Possibly. Or it could be a newly awakened individual who doesn't understand how to control their abilities yet. Either way, it's contributing to public panic and giving ammunition to people who want shifters classified as dangerous." The next few hours passed in a blur of briefings, strategy sessions, and preparation for the evening's address. Evelyn learned more about the complex world of supernatural politics than she'd ever wanted to know. The delicate balance between different shifter species, the historical tensions between urban and rural communities, the economic networks that had allowed shifter businesses to thrive in secret for generations. She also learned about the scope of the Dominion threat. Intelligence suggested they had cells in at least 12 states, with access to military-grade weapons and sophisticated communication networks. Their leader was a shifter known only as the Apex, whose identity remained a mystery even to former Dominion members who had defected over the years. The Apex believes that shifters are evolutionarily superior to humans. Director Webb explained during one briefing. Their ultimate goal is the establishment of shifter dominance over human society, with humans reduced to a subservient class or eliminated entirely. How do they plan to accomplish that with only a few thousand members? Elena asked. Terror and provocation, Marcus replied grimly. Create enough fear and violence to trigger a military response against all shifters. When moderate shifters are forced to fight for survival, some will embrace more extreme positions. Eventually, the Dominion hopes to unite all shifters under their leadership in a war against humanity. Over my dead body, Evelyn said with quiet intensity. That can probably be arranged, Webb replied dryly. Intelligence suggests the Dominion considers you their primary obstacle. Your ability to create unity between different shifter communities poses a direct threat to their recruitment efforts. The thought that extremists were planning to kill her should have been terrifying, but instead Evelyn felt a calm determination settle over her. She'd survived her sister's poison and a military assault. She could handle a few more enemies who wanted her dead. As the sun set over Washington, D.C., she stood in the West Wing preparing for the most important speech in modern American history. Through the windows, she could see protesters gathered outside the White House, both supporters calling for shifter rights and opponents demanding government action against the supernatural threat. President Chen appeared beside her, looking remarkably composed for someone dealing with a crisis that could reshape human civilization. "Any last-minute advice?" Evelyn asked. "Tell the truth," the president replied. "All of it. The good, the bad, and the complicated parts in between. The American people can handle more honesty than politicians usually give them credit for." As they walked toward the Oval Office where the cameras were waiting, Evelyn felt the pack bonds humming with support from shifters across the continent. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The age of secrets was over. Now came the much harder work of building a future where two species could coexist as equals. Chapter 7. The Truth Revealed. The Oval Office had been transformed into a television studio, with cameras and lighting equipment positioned to capture both President Chen at her desk and Evelyn standing beside an easel displaying satellite photos of Dominion attack sites. Marcus stood in the background, his massive frame serving as a living reminder of what the shadow programs had done to innocent shifters. Millions of people around the world were watching as President Chen began her address. "My fellow Americans and citizens of the world," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. 24 hours ago, most of you learned for the first time that there are people living among us who possess abilities that seem to belong in the realm of fantasy rather than reality. I'm here tonight to provide you with the truth about these individuals, about our government's past interactions with them, and about the challenges we face moving forward. The president paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle before continuing. The people you now know as shifters or werewolves have been part of human society for thousands of years. They are not monsters, they are not a threat to our way of life, and they are not the enemy. They are our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends, and in many cases our family members who simply possessed a genetic heritage that allowed them to keep a part of themselves hidden. Through her pack bonds, Evelyn could feel shifters across the continent holding their breath as they watched their existence being officially acknowledged by the most powerful government on Earth. However, President Chen continued, I must also acknowledge that elements within our own government have not always treated these citizens with the respect and protection they deserved. For decades, covert programs operating without proper oversight conducted research on shifter individuals, often without their consent, and sometimes through outright kidnapping and imprisonment. The admissions sent shockwaves through the viewing audience. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from outrage to demands for accountability, to conspiracy theories about what else the government might be hiding. These programs were wrong, they were illegal, and they are now permanently shut down, the president said firmly. Full investigations are underway, and those responsible will be held accountable regardless of their position or security clearance. She gestured toward Evelyn, who stepped forward into the camera's focus. I'm now going to turn the podium over to Evelyn Blackthorne, who serves as a leader within the shifter community and whose courage in exposing these injustices has made tonight's conversation possible. Evelyn approached the podium, acutely aware that her next words would be scrutinized by historians for generations to come. Through her pack bonds, she could feel the collective breath of her people, waiting to see how she would represent them to the human world. Thank you, Madam President, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room's audio equipment. My name is Evelyn Blackthorne, and until 3 days ago, I had no idea that shifters existed. I was raised as a human, lived as a human, and would have died as a human if not for the intervention of people who saw something in me that I didn't know was there. She gestured toward Marcus, who stepped into the camera's view. This is Marcus Greystone, who was captured by government agents in 1924 and spent the next century being experimented on, conditioned, and used as a weapon against his own people. He is living proof of what happens when fear and ignorance drive policy instead of understanding and respect. Marcus spoke, his voice carrying the weight of his experiences. I want the human audience to understand something very clearly. The shifters living among you have had the power to reveal themselves and to dominate human society for thousands of years. The fact that we chose to remain hidden, to integrate peacefully into your communities, to contribute to your societies as equals rather than conquerors, should tell you everything you need to know about our intentions. Evelyn nodded, taking control of the presentation again. But I'm not here tonight just to ask for your acceptance or understanding. I'm here to warn you about a very real threat that endangers both our communities. She moved to the easel and began pointing to the satellite images. These are attack sites in remote areas where extremist shifters have been conducting test operations. These individuals call themselves the Dominion, and they believe that shifters should rule over humans rather than coexist with them. The images were disturbing: destroyed buildings, claw marks that gouged through steel and concrete, patterns of destruction that spoke of coordinated attacks by creatures far stronger than any natural animal. The Dominion represents everything that the peaceful shifter communities oppose. Evelyn continued. They want to provoke a war between our peoples, believing that conflict will force moderate shifters to embrace extremist positions. They are planning large-scale attacks on human population centers, designed to create maximum fear and retaliation. She paused, looking directly into the camera. I'm sharing this information because both our communities are stronger when we work together. Human military and intelligence resources combined with shifter abilities and knowledge can stop these extremists before they succeed in destroying everything we've built together over centuries of peaceful coexistence. President Chen returned to the podium. To that end, I'm announcing the immediate formation of joint human shifter task forces to address the Dominion threat. Additionally, I'm signing executive orders that establish shifter communities as protected minorities under federal law, with the same rights and protections afforded to all American citizens. The legal implications were staggering. Discrimination against shifters would now be a federal crime. Government agencies would be prohibited from conducting research on shifter individuals without consent, and shifter territorial claims would be subject to the same legal frameworks that govern Native American tribal lands. I know this is a lot to process, the president continued. Change is never easy, especially change of this magnitude. But I want to remind everyone that the American experiment has always been about expanding our definition of who belongs in our national community. We've faced similar challenges before, integrating different ethnic groups, religions, and cultures into the broader American identity. Each time, we've emerged stronger and more united. Evelyn stepped forward for her final remarks. To the human viewers watching tonight, I want you to know that the shifters in your communities are not your enemies. They are the teachers who educated your children, the doctors who treated your illnesses, the soldiers who defended your freedoms, the business owners who provided your jobs. They are Americans, just like you, who happen to carry a genetic heritage that allows them to take different forms. She paused, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. But I also want you to understand that we will not return to hiding. We will not accept registration, internment, or second-class citizenship. We are prepared to work with human authorities as equals, but we will defend ourselves if attacked. The choice between cooperation and conflict is now in your hands. The address concluded with President Chen outlining the practical steps that would be taken in the coming days: congressional hearings, international coordination, public education programs, and economic integration initiatives. But Evelyn knew that the real work would happen in communities across the country, where humans and shifters would have to learn to live together openly for the first time in modern history. As the cameras shut down and the presidential address ended, Evelyn felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The secret was finally out completely, but that just meant the real challenges were beginning. Director Webb approached her with an urgent expression. "Ms. Blackthorne, we have a problem. Intelligence intercepts suggest the Dominion is moving faster than we anticipated. They're planning their first major attack for tomorrow night." "Where?" Kieran asked, appearing at Evelyn's side with the protective intensity that came naturally to mated pairs. "Multiple locations simultaneously," Webb replied grimly. "They want to overwhelm emergency response capabilities and create maximum chaos. Phoenix, Denver, Seattle, and Atlanta are the most likely targets based on communication patterns we've intercepted." "4 major cities hit at the same time," Evelyn said, her enhanced mind quickly calculating the implications. "That's not just terrorism. That's the opening move of a war." "Which is exactly what they want," Marcus added. "Panic, military response, retaliation against innocent shifters, escalating violence until moderate voices on both sides are drowned out by extremism." President Chen joined their huddle, her expression grim. "How many people are we talking about in terms of casualties?" "If they hit population centers during evening rush hour, potentially thousands," Webb replied. "And that's just the immediate deaths. The secondary effects, panic, riots, vigilante violence against shifters, could kill thousands more." Through her pack bonds, Evelyn could feel shifters across the country responding to the urgency of the situation. The Luna call she'd sent out the previous night had created more than just a temporary alliance. It had forged a permanent network that could be activated when needed. "I can coordinate the shifter response," she said. "Every legitimate shifter community in the country will help hunt down Dominion cells. But we need human authorities to trust us with intelligence and operational support." "Done," the president said immediately. "General Morrison, coordinate with Ms. Blackthorne on joint operations. Director Webb, full intelligence sharing with approved shifter representatives. We have less than 24 hours to prevent a catastrophe." As the various officials scattered to implement emergency protocols, Evelyn found herself standing in the Oval Office with Kieran and Marcus, surrounded by the symbols of American power but feeling the weight of responsibility for 2 entire species. "Are you ready for this?" Kieran asked through their mate bond. "I don't think anyone could be ready for preventing a supernatural war," she replied. "But I know one thing for certain. I'm not going to let extremists destroy what we've built. Human and shifter communities have coexisted peacefully for centuries. We're not going to let a few thousand fanatics tear that apart now." Through the pack bonds, she sent out another Luna call. Not the desperate plea for help from the previous night, but a coordinated summons for every shifter with military, police, or intelligence experience to report for emergency duty. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of individuals with the skills needed to hunt down the Dominion cells before they could strike. The next 18 hours would determine whether the revelation of shifter existence would lead to a new era of cooperation, or a devastating war between species. But as Evelyn felt the strength and determination flowing through her pack bonds, she allowed herself to feel cautiously optimistic. The Dominion had planned for human panic and government overreaction. They hadn't planned for a Luna who could unite every shifter community in North America under a single command structure, or for a human government willing to treat shifters as allies rather than threats. Tomorrow night, they would discover just how formidable that alliance could be. Chapter 8. The Hunt Begins. The Joint Operations Center established in the FBI's Washington field office buzzed with controlled chaos as human agents worked alongside shifters for the first time in modern history. Wall-mounted screens displayed maps of the 4 target cities, with red dots marking suspected Dominion safe houses, and green dots showing the positions of allied shifter teams. Evelyn stood before a massive tactical display, her enhanced senses allowing her to process information from multiple sources simultaneously. Through her pack bonds, she could feel the locations and status of over 200 shifter operatives who had answered her call. Through the government communication networks, she was receiving real-time intelligence updates from federal agencies across the country. Phoenix Team reports contact, announced Agent Sarah Martinez, one of Director Webb's top analysts. They've located a suspected weapons cache in a warehouse district outside the city. On the main screen, aerial footage showed a nondescript industrial building surrounded by shifters in wolf form. Their enhanced senses were detecting chemical signatures that human equipment couldn't match: explosives, silver-based weapons, and the distinctive scent markers that identified Dominion operatives. Confirmed Dominion presence, reported Jake Silverclaw, the Alpha leading the Phoenix operation. His voice came through the communication system with the slight distortion that occurred when shifters spoke while maintaining partial transformations. At least 12 individuals inside, heavily armed. They're preparing something big. Can you determine what kind of attack they're planning? Evelyn asked. Vehicle-borne explosives, Jake replied after a moment of enhanced sensory analysis. 3 trucks, each loaded with enough ordnance to level a city block. They were planning to hit the downtown financial district during evening rush hour. General Morrison, who had adapted remarkably quickly to working with supernatural allies, leaned over the communication console. Phoenix PD and Federal Bomb Squad are en route to your location. Can your team contain the situation until they arrive? Negative, Jake replied grimly. Dominion operatives just triggered some kind of dead man's switch. The building is now rigged to explode if they detect any human law enforcement within a 2-block radius. Then we do this the shifter way, Evelyn said, her voice carrying the authority of her Luna status across all communication channels. Jake, you have permission to use whatever force necessary to neutralize the threat. Human authorities will establish a perimeter and handle cleanup. What happened next was captured by police helicopters and would later be studied by military tacticians around the world. The Phoenix shifter team moved with coordinated precision that defied human understanding of small unit tactics, their enhanced senses allowing them to track individual enemies through concrete walls and their supernatural speed enabling them to strike before the Dominion operatives could react. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, the warehouse was secure, the truck bombs were neutralized, and 12 Dominion extremists were in custody. More importantly, intelligence recovered from the site revealed details about the coordinated attacks planned for that evening. Seattle team, you're looking for a chemical plant in the industrial district, Director Webb announced, updating the tactical display with new target information. Denver team, convention center during a major conference. Atlanta team, airport terminal during peak travel hours. The scope of the Dominion's plan was becoming clear. They weren't just planning random acts of terrorism. Each target had been chosen to maximize casualties while creating specific types of chaos that would cripple emergency response systems and provoke the most violent possible retaliation against innocent shifter communities. The chemical plant attack would have created a toxic cloud covering half of Seattle, Agent Martinez reported, her voice tight with the implications. The convention center houses an international trade summit with delegates from 30 countries. The airport, that's 15,000 people in the terminals alone. Through her pack bonds, Evelyn could feel the grim determination of her operatives as they processed the intelligence. These weren't just attacks on humans. They were attacks on the future of human-shifter coexistence, designed to make peaceful integration impossible. Denver team reports movement, announced Alpha Rebecca Moonfang, whose pack controlled the Colorado territories. Multiple vehicles leaving suspected safe houses. They're mobilizing earlier than expected. On the tactical display, red dots began moving across the Denver metropolitan area in coordinated patterns. The Dominion cells weren't waiting for evening rush hour. They were adapting their timeline in response to the Phoenix raid. All teams, assume immediate threat status, General Morrison announced. They know we're onto them, which means they're either going to accelerate their attacks or abandon this operation and go to ground. They won't abandon it, Marcus said with the certainty of someone who'd spent decades studying extremist psychology. The Dominion has been planning this for years. Their leadership will see the government response as proof that their war is inevitable. They'll push forward no matter what the cost. As if to confirm his assessment, new intelligence began flowing in from monitoring stations across the country. Dominion cells that had been dormant for months were suddenly activating, moving weapons and personnel toward population centers. It wasn't just 4 cities anymore. It was a nationwide network of extremists launching simultaneous operations. Madam President, Director Webb said into her secure communication link, we're looking at a coordinated insurgency involving at least 40 separate cells across 20 states. This is beyond what any single agency can handle. Through the speakers, President Chen's voice carried the weight of someone making decisions that would define her presidency. Authorization granted for full military support of shifter operations. National Guard units are being activated in all affected states, and I'm declaring a temporary state of emergency to streamline coordination between federal, state, and local authorities. Evelyn felt a surge of gratitude through her pack bonds as shifters across the country received confirmation that they were operating with official government backing. For the first time in their species' history, they were fighting alongside human authorities as equals, rather than hiding from them. Seattle team has eyes on target, reported Alpha David Stormcrow, his voice crackling with tension. The chemical plant is heavily fortified, and they've taken hostages. At least 20 human workers are being held inside the main facility. The tactical situation was becoming more complex by the minute. The Dominion wasn't just planning to attack human targets. They were using human hostages to complicate any rescue attempts, knowing that civilian casualties would fuel the anti-shifter backlash they wanted to create. Can your team extract the hostages without triggering a chemical release? Evelyn asked. Negative, David replied. The facility is rigged with enough explosive charges to rupture the primary storage tanks. If those blow, the toxic cloud will reach downtown Seattle within 30 minutes. Through her mate bond, Evelyn felt Kieran's surge of protective concern. He was leading one of the response teams in Virginia, tracking a Dominion cell that intelligence suggested was planning an attack on the Pentagon itself. The idea of her coordinating operations while he was in the field went against every alpha instinct he possessed. But they both understood that her unique abilities made her irreplaceable in the command role. I have an idea, she said, an unconventional solution forming in her mind. David, how many of your team members have aquatic capabilities? About half. We have several seal and otter shifters, plus a few who can handle extended underwater operations in wolf form. The chemical storage tanks are probably connected to the facility's fire suppression system, Evelyn said, her enhanced analytical abilities allowing her to process the facility blueprints that were being displayed on the tactical screens. If your aquatic shifters can access the water intake pipes from the river, they might be able to introduce a neutralizing agent that would render the chemicals harmless, even if the tanks rupture. Director Webb looked skeptical. That's assuming we can identify the right neutralizing compound and get it to the team in time. We don't need to identify it, Marcus interjected. Seattle has one of the largest shifter populations on the West Coast, including several who work as chemical engineers and environmental scientists. They'll know exactly what compound is needed and how to deploy it. The beauty of the pack bond system was becoming apparent. Instead of relying on slow bureaucratic channels to coordinate specialized knowledge, Evelyn could instantly connect experts with field operatives across vast distances. Within minutes, Dr. Jennifer Rainsong, a wolf shifter who worked for the EPA, was providing detailed instructions to the Seattle team about chemical neutralization procedures. Denver team reports successful infiltration of convention center, Alpha Rebecca announced. But we've got a problem. The Dominion operatives aren't just planning to attack the delegates. They're planning to do it during the live international broadcast of the Trade Summit. They want the entire world to watch. The implications were staggering. A shifter attack broadcast live to a global audience would destroy any possibility of peaceful integration, regardless of how many extremists were captured or killed afterward. The images would be replayed endlessly, becoming the defining moment that shaped human perception of all shifters for generations to come. Rebecca, can you disable their broadcasting equipment without triggering the attack? Working on it. My tech specialist is a Raven shifter who can access areas human security systems can't detect. But the Dominion operatives are using some kind of biological trigger system. If their heart rates drop below a certain threshold, the bombs activate automatically. Biological dead man's switches, General Morrison muttered. These people are more sophisticated than we gave them credit for. Through her pack bonds, Evelyn could feel the tension and determination of her operatives as they faced challenges that pushed the limits of even supernatural abilities. But she could also feel something else, a growing sense of unity and purpose that transcended traditional pack boundaries. The Dominion's threat was forging connections between shifter communities that had remained separate for centuries. Atlanta team checking in, announced Alpha Marcus Goldeneye, his voice tight with urgency. Airport situation is worse than anticipated. They're not just planning to attack the terminal, they're planning to hijack passenger aircraft and use them as weapons. The parallels to September 11th were unmistakable, but with supernatural perpetrators who possessed abilities that made traditional security measures useless. Shifters could change their appearance, bypass metal detectors by shifting weapons into natural claws and teeth, and move through airport infrastructure in forms too small for human security to track. How many aircraft are we talking about? President Chen's voice came through the speakers. At least 4, possibly 6. They've infiltrated ground crew positions and passenger manifests. Some of them have been in position for months, maybe years. The scope of the Dominion's planning was becoming terrifyingly clear. This wasn't a hastily organized response to the revelation of shifter existence. It was the culmination of years of preparation, designed to coincide with the moment when shifters were most vulnerable to human retaliation. All teams, priority update, Evelyn announced, her Luna authority cutting through the chaos of multiple simultaneous operations. Intelligence suggests the Dominion is using today's attacks as cover for something larger. We're not just preventing terrorist strikes. We're disrupting the opening phase of a war they've been planning for decades. Through her enhanced senses, she could detect subtle changes in the communication patterns of her field teams. The revelation that they were facing a coordinated campaign rather than isolated attacks was focusing their determination into something harder and more dangerous. Kieran, report, she said through their mate bond, needing to know that her partner was safe. Pentagon cell neutralized, he replied, his mental voice carrying exhaustion and grim satisfaction. But Evelyn, we recovered documents that suggest the Dominion has been infiltrating government positions for years. Some of the people who authorized the shifter research programs weren't just misguided. They were Dominion agents working to destabilize human-shifter relations from within. The implications were staggering. If the Dominion had been manipulating government policy for years, it meant the shadow programs hadn't just been misguided. They'd been deliberately designed to create the conditions for extremist recruitment and eventual war. "How deep does it go?" she asked. "Unknown. But Marcus was right about one thing. This is bigger than just preventing today's attacks. We're looking at a conspiracy that goes back decades, with tentacles reaching into the highest levels of government and business." Through the tactical displays, Evelyn watched as her teams engaged Dominion operatives across 4 major cities simultaneously. The operations were succeeding, chemical plants were being secured, hostages were being rescued, attack aircraft were being grounded, but each victory revealed evidence of a larger and more complex threat. "Status report from all teams," she announced. "Phoenix, 12 operatives captured, weapons cache secured, civilian casualties 0, Jake reported. "Seattle, chemical release prevented, 20 hostages rescued, 5 Dominion agents neutralized," David added. "Denver, convention center secure, international delegates safe, broadcast hijacking attempt thwarted," Rebecca confirmed. "Atlanta, 4 aircraft grounded, hijacking attempt prevented, airport operations resuming," Marcus Goldeneye concluded. The immediate crisis had been averted, but Evelyn could feel through her pack bonds that this was only the beginning. The Dominion's network was larger and more deeply entrenched than anyone had imagined, and today's failures would only make them more desperate and dangerous. "Madam President," she said into the communication system, "we've prevented the immediate attacks, but we need to prepare for escalation. The Dominion won't accept defeat quietly, and they have resources and infiltration capabilities that we're only beginning to understand." "Agreed," President Chen replied. "I'm authorizing expanded joint operations and increased intelligence sharing. This is now our highest national security priority." As the operations center began transitioning from crisis response to long-term investigation mode, Evelyn felt the weight of what they'd accomplished settling on her shoulders. In less than 72 hours, she'd gone from victim of attempted murder to Luna of a species-wide alliance that had just prevented a supernatural war. But through her pack bonds, she could sense that the real challenges were just beginning. The Dominion's public face had been exposed and defeated, but their true leadership remained hidden in the shadows, planning their next move in a conflict that would determine the future of both species. The hunt was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Chapter 9. Shadows and Revelations. 3 weeks after what the media had dubbed Dominion Day, Evelyn stood in the newly constructed Shifter Human Relations Council headquarters in Washington, D.C., reviewing intelligence reports that painted an increasingly complex picture of the threat they faced. The building itself was a symbol of the new cooperation between species. Designed by human architects working with shifter consultants to create spaces that accommodated both human, technology, and shifter sensory needs. "The apex is still out there," Director Webb said, pointing to a map covered with red pins representing Dominion activities that had continued despite the arrests of hundreds of operatives. "Every cell we've dismantled has led to 2 more that we didn't know existed. It's like fighting a hydra." Kieran entered the briefing room, his presence immediately calming the mate bond anxiety that had been building in Evelyn's chest. Leading joint operations had kept them apart more often than either of them liked, but the work was too important to let personal concerns interfere. "Intel from the Colorado raids," he said, setting a stack of documents on the conference table. "The Dominion's financial network is more sophisticated than we realized. They're not just funded by extremist sympathizers. They're running legitimate businesses that generate millions in revenue." "What kind of businesses?" Elena Moonclaw asked. As the official shifter ambassador to the United Nations, she'd been dealing with the international implications of the revelation while Evelyn focused on domestic security issues. "Everything from private security firms to pharmaceutical companies," Kieran replied. "They've been using their supernatural abilities to gain advantages in human industries for decades, then funneling the profits into their war preparations." Marcus, who had become an invaluable source of historical context for understanding Dominion tactics, growled low in his throat. During my captivity, I overheard references to something called the long game. The Dominion didn't just want to destroy human-shifter coexistence. They wanted to position themselves as the rulers of both species after the war ended. Rulers how? Evelyn asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. By being the only organized force left standing, Marcus replied grimly. Destroy moderate shifter leadership, provoke humans into military responses that devastate shifter populations, then emerge as the protectors, offering security in exchange for absolute loyalty. The strategy was diabolically clever. Instead of trying to win a conventional war against overwhelming human numerical superiority, the Dominion was engineering a situation where they would inherit control of whatever remained after both sides had exhausted themselves fighting each other. There's something else, Director Webb said, her expression troubled. We've been analyzing the genetic samples recovered from Dominion operatives, and we're seeing some disturbing patterns. Several of them show signs of artificial enhancement, genetic modifications that don't occur naturally in any shifter bloodline. Agent Martinez pulled up a holographic display showing DNA analysis results. These modifications appear to enhance aggression, reduce empathy, and increase resistance to pack bonding. It's as if someone has been breeding super soldiers specifically designed for warfare, against other shifters. The implications sent a chill through the room. If the Dominion had access to genetic modification technology, it meant their threat level was far beyond what they'd initially assessed. Where would they get that kind of capability? Elena asked. The same place they got military-grade weapons and government infiltration expertise, Evelyn said quietly. They've been getting help from elements within the human power structure. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from President Chen. Urgent briefing required. Oval Office. 1 hour. I have to go, Evelyn said, gathering her materials. Keep working on the financial networks. If we can cut off their funding, we can limit their operational capabilities. The drive to the White House gave her time to process the information they'd uncovered. The Dominion wasn't just a terrorist organization. It was a shadow government that had been preparing for decades to seize control during the chaos of species war. The revelation of shifter existence hadn't caused their emergence. It had simply accelerated a timeline that was already in motion. President Chen was waiting in the Oval Office along with several people Evelyn didn't recognize. A mix of military officers, intelligence officials, and what appeared to be scientists or researchers. Ms. Blackthorne, the president began without preamble. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention. 3 hours ago, satellite imagery detected unusual activity at a facility in Montana that we believe is connected to the Dominion's genetic modification program. One of the scientists, a nervous-looking man in his 50s, activated a tablet that projected images onto the room's main screen. This is the Helix Research Facility, officially a private biotech company working on agricultural applications. Unofficially, we now believe it's where the Dominion has been conducting human experimentation to create enhanced shifters. The aerial photos showed a sprawling complex hidden in a remote valley, with multiple buildings that looked more like military installations than research laboratories. But what made Evelyn's enhanced senses recoil was something the cameras couldn't capture. Through her pack bonds, she could feel a distortion in the natural order, as if something fundamentally wrong was happening in that location. How long has this facility been operating? She asked. At least 15 years, replied General Morrison. But we only discovered its true purpose when one of the captured Dominion operatives agreed to cooperate in exchange for protection from his own organization. What kind of experiments are they conducting? The scientist cleared his throat nervously. Based on the intelligence we've gathered, they're attempting to create artificial shifters. Humans who have been genetically modified to possess supernatural abilities without any natural shifter bloodline. The process has a 90% fatality rate, but the survivors... He paused, clearly disturbed by what he was about to reveal. The survivors show capabilities that exceed those of natural shifters. Enhanced strength, speed, sensory acuity, and most concerning of all, complete immunity to pack bonding. They're essentially sociopathic super soldiers with supernatural abilities. How many have they successfully created? Evelyn asked, dreading the answer. Unknown, but intelligence suggests at least 50 individuals over the past decade. They call them the Apex Guard, the Dominion leader's personal army. The pieces were finally coming together. The Apex wasn't just the Dominion's leader. He was surrounded by creatures that were specifically designed to be immune to the pack bonds and social connections that kept normal shifters stable and cooperative. There's more, President Chen said grimly. The facility appears to be preparing for some kind of mass production event. Satellite analysis shows construction of additional laboratory complexes and what looks like housing for thousands of test subjects. Test subjects from where? Evelyn asked, though she suspected she already knew. Missing persons reports show unusual patterns in areas with high shifter populations. One of the intelligence officials replied. Young people disappearing during routine activities, often during times when their families or pack leaders are distracted by other concerns. The Dominion had been kidnapping shifters, possibly for years, and using them as raw material for their genetic experiments. The scope of the horror was almost incomprehensible. We need to shut that facility down immediately, Evelyn said. Agreed, the president replied. But there are complications. The facility is located on land that's technically part of a Native American reservation, which means we need tribal council approval for any military action. More problematically, intelligence suggests the Dominion has early warning systems that would allow them to destroy evidence and eliminate test subjects before we could reach them. Then we don't go through official channels, Evelyn said, her Luna instincts taking over. This is exactly the kind of situation the pack bonds were designed for. I can coordinate a simultaneous strike by shifters who are already in the area, while human forces provide logistical support and secure the perimeter. The legal ramifications, one of the officials began, will be resolved after we've prevented a genocide. Evelyn cut him off. Madam President, I'm formally requesting authorization to coordinate emergency shifter operations against the Helix facility. President Chen didn't hesitate. Authorization granted. What do you need? Secure communication lines to shifter communities in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Satellite overwatch during the operation. Medical teams standing by for survivor rescue. And a guarantee that any evidence we recover will be used to prosecute everyone involved, regardless of their government connections. Done. As the briefing concluded and Evelyn prepared to coordinate the most complex shifter operation in modern history, she felt the weight of leadership settling heavier on her shoulders. The Dominion wasn't just threatening individual communities, they were attempting to corrupt the fundamental nature of what it meant to be a shifter. Through her mate bond, she felt Kieran's instant response to her distress. He was already mobilizing response teams before she'd even called him, their connection allowing for coordination that transcended normal communication channels. How long until you can have teams in position? President Chen asked. 6 hours, Evelyn replied. But Madam President, I need you to understand something. If we're right about what's happening in that facility, the shifters who participate in this raid are going to see things that will change them forever. There may be survivors who have been tortured and experimented on for years. There will definitely be evidence of crimes that go beyond what most people can psychologically process. What are you asking? I'm asking for your commitment that the people responsible for this will face justice, even if the evidence makes normal prosecution impossible. Some crimes are so heinous that they require extraordinary responses. The president met her gaze directly. You have my word. Everyone responsible for what's happened at that facility will be held accountable by whatever means necessary. As Evelyn left the White House to coordinate the most important operation of her life, she reflected on how much had changed since that night when Celeste had tried to poison her. She'd gained supernatural abilities, found her mate, discovered her heritage, and become the leader of a species fighting for its survival. But none of that had prepared her for what they were about to discover in the Montana mountains. Evidence of atrocities that would test the bonds between humans and shifters, and reveal the true scope of the Dominion's plans for both species. The facility contained answers, but Evelyn suspected that some of those answers would be more horrifying than the questions they'd been asking. Through her pack bonds, she began reaching out to every shifter within 500 miles of the target, preparing for an assault that would either cripple the Dominion's capabilities or reveal threats that made everything they'd faced so far look trivial by comparison. Either way, after tonight, nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 10. The Heart of Darkness. The Helix Research Facility squatted in the Montana Valley like a malignant tumor. Its sterile buildings and razor wire fences a stark contrast to the pristine wilderness surrounding it. From her position on a ridge overlooking the complex, Evelyn used her enhanced vision to study the target while coordinating with shifter teams positioned around the perimeter. Thermal imaging shows approximately 40 human personnel and an unknown number of enhanced subjects, reported Alpha Jennifer Werewolf, whose pack controlled the northern Montana territories. But there's something strange about the readings from the main laboratory building. The signatures don't match normal human or shifter patterns. Through her pack bonds, Evelyn could feel the unease radiating from all the assembled shifters. Whatever was happening in that facility was wrong in ways that triggered every supernatural instinct they possessed. "Kieran, status report," she said through their mate bond. "Southern perimeter secured," he replied, his mental voice tight with controlled anger. "We've identified at least 6 guards carrying silver-tipped ammunition and what look like chemical weapons designed specifically for shifter physiology." "Marcus, what are you sensing from your position?" The ancient dire wolf's consciousness touched hers, carrying overtones of rage and recognition that made her stomach clench. The sense. They're using some of the same chemical compounds that were used on me during my captivity. Fear, pain, desperation, and something else. Something artificial that doesn't belong in any living creature. The coordinated assault began at precisely midnight. Shifter teams moved through the darkness with supernatural stealth, neutralizing perimeter guards and security systems while human federal agents established outer containment. The facility's early warning systems never had a chance to activate. By the time the first alarm sounded, the complex was already surrounded, but the Dominion had prepared for an assault. As the shifter teams breached the outer buildings, they encountered resistance that went far beyond normal human capabilities. "Contact!" Alpha Jennifer's voice crackled through the communication system. "We've got enhanced hostiles in the north building. They're fast, strong, and they're not showing up on thermal imaging." Through her pack bonds, Evelyn felt her operatives' shock and fear as she encountered creatures that moved like shifters, but felt wrong in every way that mattered. The artificial shifters were physically superior to their natural counterparts, but they lacked the social connections that made pack tactics possible. "All teams, modify approach patterns," Evelyn commanded. "You're not facing normal shifters. These things don't have pack bonds, which means they can't anticipate group tactics. Use that advantage." The next few minutes were chaos as supernatural creatures fought each other using abilities that shouldn't have existed. The artificial shifters were individually superior, but they fought like wild animals rather than intelligent beings. Natural shifters, guided by pack bonds and centuries of cooperative hunting experience, gradually gained the upper hand. "Main laboratory building breached," Kieran reported, his voice carrying undertones that made Evelyn's blood run cold. "Evelyn, you need to see this. All of you do." She made her way through the compound, past disabled security systems and unconscious guards, until she reached the central laboratory building. What she found there would haunt her for the rest of her life. The main laboratory was a cathedral of horrors. Hundreds of holding cells containing humans and shifters in various stages of genetic modification. Some were clearly recent captures, still recognizable as the people they'd once been. Others had been changed so drastically that their species was no longer identifiable. "My God," whispered Dr. Sarah Whitehorse, the shifter veterinarian who was serving as the operations medical coordinator. "How long has this been going on?" Marcus stood before one of the holding cells, his massive frame trembling with barely contained rage. Inside was something that had once been a wolf shifter, but genetic modifications had turned it into a creature that belonged in nightmares rather than nature. "At least 20 years, he said, his voice thick with old pain and fresh horror. "I recognize some of these procedures from my own captivity, but they've refined them, perfected them." Deeper in the facility, they found evidence of the Dominion's true agenda. Computer files detailed not just the creation of artificial shifters, but plans for mass production of genetic modification viruses that could be released into human water supplies, creating unwilling converts who would be psychologically conditioned to serve the Dominion. They weren't just planning to rule after a war, Evelyn realized, reading through the documentation. They were planning to create a new species entirely, humans with shifter abilities, but without the social bonds that prevent tyranny. Director Webb, who had arrived with the federal backup teams, was reviewing financial records that showed the scope of the conspiracy. This facility was funded through shell companies connected to defense contractors, pharmaceutical corporations, and at least 3 different government agencies. The Dominion wasn't working alone. They had help from the highest levels of human power. "How high?" President Chen's voice came through the secure communication link. "Congressional oversight committees, cabinet-level officials. Possibly higher," Webb replied grimly. "Ma'am, we're looking at a conspiracy that reaches into the core of the federal government." As dawn broke over the Montana mountains, the full scope of what they'd discovered began to sink in. The Helix facility wasn't just a research installation. It was the prototype for a network of similar facilities that were being constructed around the world. The Dominion's war wasn't just against human-shifter coexistence. It was against the very concept of free will for either species. "How many survivors?" Evelyn asked Dr. Whitehorse, who was coordinating the medical evacuation of the facility's victims. 43 individuals. "Who can be saved?" the veterinarian replied, her voice heavy with the weight of what she'd seen. "Maybe 60 more who might be helped if we can develop treatments for the genetic modifications. The rest..." She didn't need to finish. The rest were beyond help, their bodies and minds so altered by years of experimentation that death would be a mercy. "And the enhanced guards?" 15 captured alive, 8 killed during the assault, Kieran reported. "The survivors are being held in specialized containment that blocks their artificial abilities. But Evelyn, they're not showing any signs of normal shifter psychology. No pack instincts, no social bonding, no empathy responses. They're essentially sophisticated predators with human intelligence." The implications were terrifying. The Dominion had succeeded in creating creatures that possessed supernatural abilities without any of the social connections that kept normal shifters stable and cooperative. If the technology for creating such beings became widespread, it could destabilize human society in ways that conventional warfare never could. "Ma'am," Agent Martinez approached with a tablet displaying intelligence gathered from the facility's computers. "We've identified locations of at least 12 other facilities in various stages of construction. Most of them are in remote locations, but 3 are near major population centers." "And the financial network?" "Completely exposed. We have transaction records, funding sources, shell company structures, everything. This is going to bring down conspiracy networks that have been operating in secret for decades." As federal agents processed evidence and medical teams evacuated survivors, Evelyn stood outside the main laboratory building with Kieran and Marcus. watching the sun rise over mountains that had witnessed one of the darkest chapters in the history of human-shifter relations. "It's not over," Marcus said quietly. "The apex is still out there, and now he knows that his network has been compromised. He'll accelerate whatever final plan he's been preparing." "What kind of final plan?" Evelyn asked, though she dreaded the answer. "The kind that destroys everything he can't control," the ancient direwolf replied. The Dominion was never planning to win through superior force. They were planning to win by ensuring that everyone else lost. Through her pack bonds, Evelyn could feel shifters across the continent responding to news of what had been discovered at the facility. The revelation that their own kind had been used as experimental subjects was awakening a protective fury that transcended traditional pack boundaries. But she could also sense something darker, a growing realization that the threat they faced was more complex and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. President Chen's voice came through the communication system. "Ms. Blackthorne, I need you back in Washington immediately. Based on what you've discovered, we're facing a national security crisis that requires resources from every agency in the federal government." "Understood, Madam President. But I want guarantees that the survivors from this facility receive the best medical care possible, regardless of cost. And I want protection details assigned to every shifter community leader in the country. If the Dominion is willing to go this far, they won't hesitate to target anyone who opposes them." Done. And Ms. Blackthorne, what you've accomplished here today has probably saved both our species from a war that would have destroyed everything we've built together. The American people owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. As helicopters arrived to transport the senior team members back to Washington, Evelyn took one last look at the facility that had housed so much suffering and horror. The buildings would be demolished, the evidence processed, the survivors cared for. But the knowledge of what had happened here would remain, a reminder of what could happen when fear and hatred were allowed to guide scientific advancement. The fight against the Dominion was entering its final phase, but Evelyn suspected that the most dangerous challenges still lay ahead. The Apex had lost his primary research facility and much of his support network, but cornered predators were often at their most deadly. Whatever came next, she would face it with the strength of every pack bond she'd forged, the wisdom of ancient shifters like Marcus, and the love of a mate who had proven willing to follow her into the heart of darkness itself. The war for the future of both species was far from over. Chapter 11. The Final Confrontation. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council was unlike anything in the organization's history. For the first time, non-human representatives sat at the table as equals, with Elena Moonclaw serving as the official shifter ambassador, and Evelyn present as the Luna of the North American Coalition. The evidence recovered from the Helix facility had sparked international investigations that were uncovering Dominion operations on every continent. The genetic modification technology has been distributed to at least 40 facilities worldwide, reported UN Secretary General Williams, his voice heavy with the implications. We're not just dealing with an American domestic terrorism issue. We're facing a global conspiracy that threatens the fundamental nature of human society. Through the secure screens, leaders from around the world were participating in the emergency session. The president of Russia admitted to discovering 3 Dominion facilities in Siberia. The Prime Minister of Canada reported mysterious disappearances in remote territories that now made sinister sense. Even countries that had never officially acknowledged the existence of shifters were being forced to confront evidence of Dominion infiltration. The question before us, Secretary General, Williams continued, is how to coordinate an international response to a threat that operates outside the boundaries of traditional nation-states and possesses capabilities that transcend conventional military planning. Evelyn stood to address the assembly, her Luna authority carrying clearly through the translation systems to every delegate present. The Dominion's strength has always been secrecy and division. They succeeded for decades because shifter communities remained isolated from each other and from human governments. But the pack bonds I've helped forge between communities have created a communication network that spans continents. She activated a holographic display that showed the global shifter network in real time, thousands of connections linking packs and individuals across every time zone. This is what the Dominion fears most: unity between shifters and cooperation between shifters and humans. Their entire strategy depends on keeping us separated and suspicious of each other. "What are you proposing?" asked the Chinese representative, her skepticism clear even through the translator. "A coordinated global strike against all known Dominion facilities simultaneously," Evelyn replied. "Not just the research installations, but their financial networks, communication systems, and leadership hiding places. We end this conspiracy in a single operation that gives them no time to adapt or escape." The audacity of the proposal sent murmurs through the assembly. Coordinating military operations across multiple continents, involving both government forces and supernatural entities, was a logistical challenge that had never been attempted in human history. "The technical difficulties alone," the German representative began, "are manageable when you have instantaneous communication through pack bonds," Elena interrupted. "Shifter communities worldwide have been preparing for this moment since the Luna's call went out. We have operatives in position near every major Dominion facility, human allies in key government positions, and intelligence networks that reach into places conventional spies could never access." President Chen, participating via secure video link, spoke for the first time during the session. "The United States is prepared to coordinate our intelligence assets with any nation willing to participate in joint operations against Dominion targets. We've seen what happens when these extremists are allowed to operate unopposed, and we will not permit that to continue. And if some of the evidence points to compromised officials within our own governments?" asked the British representative pointedly. "Then those officials will be held accountable, regardless of their position or political connections," Elena replied firmly. "The Dominion's infiltration of government agencies is a threat to democratic institutions everywhere. This is bigger than national politics. This is about the survival of free society." Through her pack bonds, Evelyn could feel shifters around the world responding to the discussion. The global network she'd helped create was alive with information sharing, tactical planning, and emotional support between communities that had never communicated before. It was the opposite of everything the Dominion represented: cooperation instead of domination, unity instead of division, protection instead of exploitation. "There's something else the Security Council needs to know," Evelyn said, her voice carrying a gravity that made every